There are trails in the Pacific Northwest that disappeared from maps years ago, places where the forest decides what happens next. Every season, people walk into these forgotten routes, experienced hikers, prepared and confident, and something out there changes them forever. Some made it back and filed reports that were never investigated. Others left behind journals, gear, and footage that no one can explain. What you're about to hear are 11 documented encounters from those trails, incidents that happened in places you could visit right now. The people involved knew what they were doing. It didn't matter. Welcome to Verified Fears. Maisie is standing at the trailhead of what should be a simple 8-mile run through Olympic National Forest, the kind of route she's completed dozens of times before. The afternoon light filters through the canopy of Sitka spruce and western hemlock, creating that familiar green-tinted glow that makes the Pacific Northwest feel like another world entirely. Her GPS watch is synced, her hydration pack is full, and she's left a note in her car with her expected return time. Everything is by the book, exactly as it should be. Maisie starts running, settling into that comfortable rhythm where her breath matches her footfalls and the forest becomes a blur of moss and fern. 20 minutes in, she notices a distinctive Douglas fir stump on her right, massive and hollowed out by decades of decay, with a peculiar split down the middle that makes it look like an open mouth. She makes a mental note of it because the shape is unusual, almost unsettling in how much it resembles something screaming. She keeps running, pushing through a section where the understory thickens and salal bushes crowd the trail. Her watch buzzes at the 3-mile mark, right on schedule, and she feels that familiar satisfaction of a good pace maintained. Another 20 minutes pass, and Maisie rounds a bend expecting to see the creek crossing marked on her map. Instead, she sees the stump, the same stump, the screaming mouth of split wood. Her first thought is that there must be two similar stumps, some coincidence of decay patterns. But as she slows to a walk and approaches it, she sees the same cluster of orange mushrooms growing from its base, the same pattern of moss coverage, even the same broken branch resting against its left side. This is the same stump. Her heart rate spikes in a way that has nothing to do with exertion. She checks her GPS watch. It shows she's covered 5 miles now, moving in a straight line northeast along the trail. The elevation gain matches what she'd expect, but she's looking at something she saw 40 minutes ago. Maisie tells herself she got turned around somehow, maybe took a wrong turn she didn't notice, even though the trail has been clearly marked and she's been paying attention. She starts running again, faster now, pushing harder than she should this early in a run. She's watching for landmarks, anything distinctive. A fallen log covered in bright green moss, a western red cedar with an unusual double trunk, a sword fern that's grown enormous, its fronds spreading across half the trail. She catalogs each one mentally, timestamps creating themselves in her mind. 22 minutes later, Maisie sees the stump again. The same stump. She stops dead, her breath coming in sharp gasps that aren't from physical effort. This isn't possible. She's been running hard in a straight line on a clearly defined trail. Her watch confirms it. She's now covered 7 miles. The elevation profile on her GPS shows consistent movement, no backtracking, no loops. But her eyes see what they see. She approaches the stump, and this time, she does something she should have done before. She pulls out her phone and takes a photo, documenting the exact arrangement of mushrooms, the moss pattern, everything. Then she takes a stick and scratches a large X into the mud at its base. Evidence. Proof. Something to tell her if she's losing her mind or if something else is happening. She runs again, and this time she's not just running the trail. She's studying every inch of it. The path is well maintained, obviously used regularly, marked with the standard trail blazes every 50 yards. There are no turnoffs, no places where she could have accidentally doubled back. The forest on either side is thick enough that leaving the trail would be immediately obvious. Her phone has no signal, which is normal for this area, but her downloaded maps still work. According to them, she's progressing along the trail exactly as she should be. 18 minutes this time. Maisie knew it was coming, but seeing the stump again sends ice through her veins. She checks the base. The X she scratched in the mud is there, but it looks weathered, as if it's been there for hours rather than minutes. Beside it is another X, fresher, and she realizes with dawning horror that she's looking at the mark she'll make next time. She backs away from the stump, her mind refusing to process what that means. The light is different now. It's getting darker, the afternoon transitioning toward dusk faster than it should. She's been running for what feels like just over an hour, but the forest has the quality of late evening. She checks her watch. It shows she's been moving for 1 hour and 12 minutes. She checks her phone. The timestamp says it's been 3 hours and 40 minutes since she started. Both devices are working perfectly. Both are telling her different things. Maisie starts running again, and this time there's no pretense of pace control. She's sprinting, crashing through the trail with desperate energy. She needs to break this cycle. She needs to find something different, see something that proves she's not trapped in some impossible loop. But the forest looks exactly the same in every direction. The same species of trees, the same thickness of undergrowth, the same quality of light. It's as if she's running through a single repeated section of wilderness, like a video game environment that hasn't fully loaded. The stump appears again, and Maisie doesn't bother checking her time. She notices something new this time, though. Her footprints. They're in the mud beside the trail, fresh and clear in the damp earth. Running shoes, her size, her tread pattern. But they're heading in the direction she just came from, and they're fresh. She kneels down and presses her hand beside one. The depth is right. The spacing suggests someone running at her pace. These are her prints, but she didn't make them. Or she hasn't made them yet. Or she made them hours ago. Time has become meaningless. She looks around the forest with new attention, trying to see anything that doesn't fit. That's when she notices the silence. There are no birds, no insects, no wind moving through the canopy. The forest is utterly still, and she realizes it has been since the second time she saw the stump. She's been so focused on the impossibility of the loop that she didn't notice the absence of life. The forest is empty. Empty except for her. Empty except for the stump. Empty except for the trail that goes nowhere. Maisie makes a decision. The trail has betrayed her, reality has betrayed her, so she'll betray them both. She steps off the trail directly into the undergrowth, pushing through salal and ferns, forcing her way into the thick vegetation. Branches scratch her arms and face. Her shoes sink into soft earth. This is real. This is different. She keeps pushing, using her phone's compass to maintain a straight line perpendicular to the trail. The vegetation is so dense she can barely see 3 feet ahead, but she keeps moving. Time loses meaning. It might be 10 minutes or an hour. Her legs are burning, her lungs aching, but she doesn't stop. Then suddenly the vegetation breaks and she stumbles onto pavement. A logging road, old but maintained, gravel and mud. She's never been so happy to see a road in her life. She turns and starts jogging along it, following it downhill on the assumption that down leads to civilization. 40 minutes later, Maisie reaches her car. It's parked exactly where she left it, in the small trailhead lot. She collapses against it, hands shaking as she fumbles for her keys. She checks her fitness tracker. It shows she's been moving for 14 hours, covering over 40 miles. She checks her watch. It shows 3 hours and 8 minutes have passed. Her water bottle is in her pack, completely empty. She has no memory of drinking from it, but her mouth isn't dry. She doesn't feel dehydrated. She gets in her car and drives, not looking back at the trailhead. That night, safe at home, she reviews the photo she took of the stump. In the background, barely visible in the shadows of the forest, is a figure. It's wearing her jacket. She can see herself running past the stump while she was standing there, photographing it. The metadata on the photo confirms it was taken when she remembers taking it. She was in 2 places at once. 3 weeks later, Maisie still can't run trails alone. Every loop looks suspicious. Every familiar landmark makes her heart race. And sometimes, when she's running in the city on perfectly mapped streets, she'll round a corner and see something she swears she passed 10 minutes ago. And she'll have to stop and count her breaths until she's sure the world is staying still. Pearl had been backpacking for 3 days when he decided to make camp in a small clearing surrounded by old-growth hemlocks in the North Cascades backcountry. The spot seemed perfect at first. Flat ground, far enough from the creek to avoid moisture, ringed by trees that would provide windbreak if the weather turned. He pitched his tent as the sun started its descent, that golden hour light making everything look softer than it was. He'd been hiking solo for years, preferred it that way, and the isolation this deep in the wilderness gave him a peace he couldn't find anywhere else. By the time full darkness settled, he had his camp stove going, water boiling for freeze-dried dinner, and the comfortable routine of another night under the stars ahead of him. The temperature was dropping fast, which wasn't unusual for altitude, and he was already planning to get into his sleeping bag early. That's when he first noticed the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even particularly unusual. Just the creak of wood, the kind of sound trees make when wind pushes through them or when temperature changes cause expansion and contraction. But there was no wind. The air was completely still, so still he could hear his own breathing echoing back at him. The creaking continued, rhythmic and steady. He told himself it was nothing, just the forest settling for the night. Trees make noise. Everyone who spends time in the woods knows that. He finished his dinner, cleaned his cook pot, and hung his food bag on a bare line 20 yards from camp. The creaking continued the entire time, never stopping, never varying in rhythm. When he crawled into his tent and zipped himself into his sleeping bag, he could still hear it. That steady creak, creak, creak. He tried to time his breathing to it, unconsciously, the way you'll sometimes sync your footsteps to music you're hearing. His exhales matched the creaks. After a while, he stopped noticing he was doing it. I woke up around 2 in the morning, and something felt wrong immediately. My chest was tight, like someone was pressing down on my sternum. I was gasping, trying to pull in air, but my lungs wouldn't expand properly. Panic hit me hard and fast. Was I having a heart attack? An allergic reaction? I unzipped my sleeping bag and stumbled out of my tent, desperate for fresh air. The moment I stood up outside, I could breathe again. Deep, full breaths that filled my lungs completely. My chest stopped hurting. But the forest was still creaking, and now that I was fully awake and outside, I could hear it more clearly. It wasn't just 1 or 2 trees. It was all of them. Every hemlock surrounding my campsite was moving, swaying inward toward the clearing, then back, then inward again. The rhythm was perfect, synchronized, like a breathing pattern. And there was still no wind. I stood there in the darkness with just my headlamp, watching trees that shouldn't be moving. They were massive, ancient. Some of them probably 300 years old or more. Their trunks had to be 4 feet in diameter. Trees that size don't sway without significant force. But they were moving, all of them together, leaning toward my clearing and then straightening, over and over. I timed it without meaning to. 7 seconds in, 3 seconds hold, 7 seconds out. That's when I realized. That was my breathing pattern. When I was sleeping, when my breathing deepened into sleep rhythm, that's exactly the pace I breathed at. 7 in, hold, 7 out. The forest was breathing with me, or I was breathing with it. I held my breath to test the theory, and my chest immediately started to tighten again. That pressure returned, squeezing, making my vision start to tunnel. The trees kept moving, kept creaking through their cycle. 7 seconds in, 3 seconds hold, 7 seconds out. My body was screaming for air, my lungs burning, but I held on, trying to prove I was in control. The trees didn't stop. They didn't even slow down. 20 seconds of holding my breath, and the pressure in my chest became unbearable. I gasped involuntarily, and the moment I did, I fell into the rhythm again. 7 in, 3 hold, 7 out. The trees continued their synchronized sway, and I was breathing with them. I tried to change my pattern, to breathe faster or slower, to break whatever synchronization had formed. But every time I altered my breathing, that crushing pressure returned to my chest. It felt like my ribcage was being compressed by invisible hands, like my lungs were being squeezed in a vice. The only way to breathe normally, to breathe without pain, was to match the rhythm of the trees. 7 in, 3 hold, 7 out. I stood there for over an hour, trapped in this breathing pattern, watching the forest move around me. The rational part of my brain kept trying to find explanations. Underground water creating pressure changes, seismic activity too subtle to feel but strong enough to affect root systems. Some kind of mass hallucination caused by altitude or bad water or carbon monoxide from my camp stove, even though I'd been cooking outside. None of it made sense. Trees don't breathe, trees don't move in perfect unison without wind, and trees definitely don't control whether a human being can draw air into their lungs. As the night dragged on, I became more and more aware of the forest as a single entity. The clearing wasn't just a clearing, it was inside something. The ring of hemlocks wasn't just trees growing in a circle. They were a perimeter, a boundary, maybe even a mouth. I was camping inside something vast and alive, something that had been here long before humans ever walked these mountains, and I'd synced myself to its respiratory system. The longer I breathed with it, the more I felt connected to it. I could sense the roots beneath my feet, spreading through the soil in massive networks. I could feel the slow movement of water through bark and wood. I could almost understand what it was, this thing that wore the shape of a forest, but was something else entirely. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It had just noticed me, had incorporated me into itself the way your body incorporates oxygen. And now we were linked. The sky started to lighten around 5 in the morning, that deep black fading to dark blue. The trees were still moving, still creaking through their cycle, and I was still breathing with them. 7 in, 3 hold, 7 out. I hadn't slept. I didn't dare sleep. Some instinct told me that if I fell asleep while connected to this thing, I might not wake up as myself anymore. I might become part of it permanently. rooted here in ways that had nothing to do with plants and everything to do with whatever strange consciousness was pulsing through this forest. As soon as there was enough light to see by, I started breaking camp. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the zippers and buckles. The entire time, I maintained the breathing pattern. 7 in, 3 hold, 7 out. I didn't have a choice. Any deviation brought that crushing pressure back immediately. I got my tent packed, my gear loaded into my backpack. I took down my food bag, all of it while breathing in perfect rhythm with the trees around me. They hadn't stopped once through the entire night. By the time I was ready to leave, the sun was starting to actually break through the canopy, and I thought maybe once I got away from this clearing, the connection would break. I started hiking, practically running down the trail, putting distance between myself and those hemlocks. A quarter mile away, I tried to change my breathing. The pressure hit me instantly, and I gasped back into rhythm. Half a mile away, same thing. A mile away, and I could still feel it. That crushing sensation the moment I tried to breathe at my own pace. 2 miles away, I came to another clearing and stopped to rest, my legs burning from the frantic pace. I was drenched in sweat despite the morning cold, and I was still breathing in rhythm. 7 in, 3 hold, 7 out. It took me 6 hours to hike out to the trailhead, a distance that should have taken 3. Every step was synchronized to that breathing pattern, and by the time I reached my car, I'd accepted that something had fundamentally changed. I drove home, went back to my life, tried to pretend everything was normal. But I wasn't normal anymore. I couldn't be. Every night when I go to sleep, I breathe in that same pattern. 7 in, 3 hold, 7 out. If I try to change it, I wake up gasping, that crushing pressure on my chest, forcing me back into rhythm. I bought a wooden box, stupid as it sounds, just a small cedar box from a craft store. I keep it beside my bed, and every night before I sleep, I open it and listen to it creak. That sound of wood moving, settling, breathing. It helps. It reminds me I'm still connected to whatever I found in that clearing, or whatever found me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only one. Sometimes I wonder how many other people are out there, breathing in patterns they can't control, synced to forests they'll never escape. And sometimes, late at night when I'm locked into that rhythm and can't break free, I swear I can feel the roots again, spreading through soil miles away, and I know that something vast is still breathing. And I'm breathing with it. And I always will be. Adelie and I had been hiking the Cape Disappointment Coastal Trail for about 2 hours when we first saw the fog. It was late afternoon, one of those perfect Pacific Northwest days where the sun actually breaks through and the ocean stretches out blue and endless below the cliffs. We'd been talking about nothing important, just enjoying the rare weather and the views, when we rounded a bend, and there it was. A wall of fog sitting across the trail maybe 50 yards ahead, perfectly vertical, perfectly still. That should have been our first warning. The wind was steady that day, coming off the ocean like it always does on that stretch of coast. Strong enough that we'd both tied our hair back. But this fog wasn't moving. It was just sitting there like a curtain hung across the path, dense and white and completely motionless, despite the wind that was hitting everything else around it. I stopped walking, and Adelie bumped into me from behind. "What is that?" she asked, and I realized I didn't have an answer. Fog doesn't work that way. It doesn't form walls. It doesn't ignore wind. It rolls in from the ocean in banks and wisps, always moving, always changing shape. This was different. This was wrong. We stood there for probably 30 seconds, just staring at it. And then I saw the figure. Inside the fog, maybe 20 feet from the edge, there was a dark shape. Human-shaped but indistinct, like a shadow in smoke. It was standing completely still, and even though I couldn't see any features, I knew it was facing us. I knew it was watching. Adelie saw it at the same moment I did. I felt her hand grab my arm, her fingers digging in hard. "There's someone in there," she whispered, even though there was no reason to whisper. The closest other hikers were miles behind us. "Should we call out?" I asked. But something in my gut told me not to. That shape didn't look like someone who needed help. It looked like someone waiting. We stood frozen, not sure what to do. And that's when the figure moved. Not walked, not shifted position, just moved. One moment it was 20 feet inside the fog, the next it was in a different spot, maybe 15 feet in, maybe off to the left. I didn't see it transition between positions. It just appeared in a new location, like frames had been cut from a video. Adelie's breathing got faster beside me, and I realized mine was matching pace with hers. The figure moved again, and this time I was watching for it. There was no walking, no turning, no physical movement. It just blinked from one position to another. Now it was on the right side of the fog wall. Now it was closer to the front. Now it was dead center again. Every position put it roughly the same distance from us, maintaining that 20-foot gap. But it was circling inside the fog like it was studying us from different angles. "We should go back," Adelie said. And I agreed completely. We both turned around at the same time and started walking quickly back the way we'd come. We didn't run, not yet. But we were moving fast. I counted steps in my head, trying to figure out how far we needed to go before we'd be far enough away from whatever that thing was. I got to 47 steps before Adelie grabbed my arm again and stopped dead. The fog was in front of us. The same wall of fog, the same perfect vertical curtain, now blocking the trail in the direction we'd just come from. We spun around. Behind us, where the fog had been before, the trail was clear, open and empty and normal. The fog had moved, or we'd moved, or something had moved, but now it was blocking our retreat. And inside it, closer to the edge now, the figure was still there, still watching. "What do you want?" I shouted at it, my voice cracking halfway through. The wind was still blowing steady. I could feel it on my face. But the fog didn't ripple or shift at all. The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there in its unchanging shadow shape. Adelie pulled out her phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising on this part of the trail, but her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped it. "We need to go around it," she said. "Through the brush, off the trail. We can't stay here." I looked at the terrain on either side of us. To our left was cliff face, not vertical but steep enough that climbing it would be slow and dangerous. To our right was the drop to the ocean, maybe 100 feet of rocky slope that ended in surf and tide pools. Neither option was good, but the drop to the ocean seemed more survivable than staying on this trail. We moved to the right edge of the path and started picking our way down the slope. The ground was loose, a mix of dirt and small rocks that shifted under our feet. We had to brace ourselves on scrub brush and move carefully, testing each step. I kept looking back up at the trail, watching the fog. It was keeping pace with us. As we moved along the slope parallel to the trail, the fog moved too, staying level with our position, always blocking any route back to the trailhead. The figure inside it had multiplied. Now there were two shapes, both the same distance from the fog's edge, both watching us, both moving in that same impossible way, blinking from position to position without transition, Adelie slipped, her foot catching on loose rock, and she slid about 5 feet down the slope before catching herself on a larger boulder. I scrambled down to her, helping her up, checking for injuries. She had scraped her palms, and her ankle was already starting to swell, but she could put weight on it. "Keep moving," she said through gritted teeth, and we continued working our way along the slope. The ocean was getting louder as we descended, waves crashing against rocks with that deep bass boom that you feel in your chest. The fog was still tracking us, and now there were 3 figures inside it. All identical, all watching, all maintaining that exact distance. I realized they weren't just watching us. They were mirroring us. When I moved my right arm to grab a handhold, one of the figures made the same motion, delayed by maybe a second. When Adelie adjusted her backpack, another figure did the same movement. The third one seemed to be moving on its own, or maybe it was copying movements we were about to make. I couldn't tell. We reached a point where the slope leveled out into a narrow beach, more rocks than sand, tide pools scattered between boulders. The trail was about 40 feet above us now, running along the cliff edge. The fog was still up there, still visible, and now I could see it was expanding. It was growing longer along the trail, stretching out in both directions like it was trying to surround us vertically even though we descended. The figures inside it had multiplied again. I counted 5 now, all moving in that disturbing stop-motion way. "We need to keep moving south," I told Adelie. "Follow the beach, stay below the trail. Eventually we'll hit the parking area." She nodded, limping but keeping pace. We started making our way across the rocks, climbing over tide pool barriers, the spray from the waves soaking us. That's when I noticed we were moving wrong. I'd look down to navigate the rocks, look up to check our direction, and we'd be facing a different way. Not drastically different, but shifted by maybe 30 degrees. It happened again, and again. Every time either of us looked away from the ocean and then back, our orientation had changed. We were being rotated somehow, gradually, and the more I tried to compensate, the worse it got. I pulled out my phone, used the compass app. We were facing north. We'd been trying to go south. I adjusted our direction, made sure we were heading the right way. 2 minutes later, I checked again. We were facing east, directly toward the cliff face. I hadn't felt us turn. Neither of us had consciously changed direction. But we kept ending up wrong. The fog had descended the cliff. It was on the beach with us now. But it wasn't one wall anymore. It was multiple patches, appearing and disappearing in different locations. And in each patch were the figures. They were all around us now. Always that same 20 feet away, always watching, always mirroring our movements with that 1-second delay. Except for one. One of the figures was doing things before we did them. I watched it raise its right hand, and 2 seconds later, Adelie raised her right hand. She hadn't meant to. She looked at her own arm like it had betrayed her, shock on her face. "I didn't do that," she said. "I didn't decide to do that." The figure in the fog reached down and touched the ground. 5 seconds later, I felt my body crouch and my hand press against the wet rocks. I hadn't chosen to do it. The movement just happened, my body following instructions I wasn't giving it. We started running, as much as you can run on slippery rocks with waves crashing around you. We weren't navigating anymore, weren't trying to maintain direction, just trying to escape. The fog was everywhere now. Patches of it appearing and vanishing, and the figures were multiplying faster. Dozens of them, all around us in the fog, all doing that horrible stop-motion movement. Adelie screamed. and I looked over to see her walking toward one of the fog patches, even though she was clearly trying to move away from it. Her legs were carrying her forward while her upper body twisted and fought. I grabbed her arm, tried to pull her back, but my own legs started walking toward a different fog patch. We were both being puppeted, both losing control, and the figures in the fog were getting clearer. I could almost see features now, almost see faces. They looked like us. They looked exactly like us. Then everything stopped. The fog vanished. All of it, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. We were standing on the beach, both breathing hard, both soaked from spray and sweat. The sun was low in the sky, much lower than it should have been. Hours had passed. My phone was dead. Adelie's phone was dead. We climbed back up to the trail, helping each other over the rough terrain, and started hiking toward the parking area. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? When we finally reached my car, we checked ourselves in the mirrors. We both had bruises on our necks, both on the same side, both the same size and shape. They looked like handprints. 4 fingers and a thumb, pressed into skin, except the prints were too deep, pressed in from the inside out, like something had grabbed us from inside our own bodies. We don't hike together anymore. We don't really talk anymore. But every morning when I wake up, I check my movements in the mirror. I watch to make sure I'm moving when I decide to move, that my hands go where I tell them to go. Because sometimes, just for a split second, there's a delay. I'll think about lifting my arm, and it'll happen 1 second late, like the signal has to travel through somewhere else first. And in that second of delay, I can feel the fog still around me, and I can feel the figure still watching, still learning, still wearing my shape in some space I can't see. We got out of the fog that day. I know we did. But I'm not sure what got out with us, and I'm not sure which one of us is really me anymore. I never thought I'd be grateful for a thunderstorm, but when I saw those clouds rolling in over Mount Rainier that afternoon, I actually felt relieved. I'd been hiking since dawn, pushing to make it to the summit of a smaller peak nearby, and the weather had been holding steady all day. Then, in the span of maybe 20 minutes, the sky went from clear blue to threatening gray, and I knew I needed to get off the exposed ridge fast. Lightning and alpine environments don't mix, and I wasn't stupid enough to test that combination. I started descending quickly, looking for any kind of shelter, and that's when I saw the structure. It was tucked into a fold in the terrain, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, a small wooden emergency shelter that I'd never noticed on any of my previous hikes in this area. The roof looked solid, the walls intact, and as the first fat drops of rain started falling, I didn't hesitate. I ducked inside just as the storm really opened up. The shelter was bigger than it looked from outside, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with a packed dirt floor and rough wooden walls. There were supplies stacked along one side, emergency blankets, some canned food with labels so faded I couldn't read them, a couple of old lanterns, and a plastic bin that might have contained first aid supplies. In the corner was a wooden crate serving as a makeshift table, and on top of it was a notebook. A logbook, the kind some shelters maintain where hikers can write about their experiences. I picked it up, curious, and started flipping through pages. The entries went back decades. The earliest one I found was dated 1987, someone named Marcus writing about getting caught in a snowstorm. The handwriting was careful, measured, the entries short. As I flipped forward, I found more entries scattered across the years. Some were recent, within the last few months. People writing about the view, the weather, thanking whoever maintained this place. Then I found my entry, my handwriting, my name. dated 3 days from now. My hand started shaking so badly, I almost dropped the book. I read it 3 times, making sure I wasn't misreading, making sure this wasn't someone else with the same name. But it was my handwriting, the specific way I form my letters, even the small flourish I do on capital letters that I've had since high school. And the entry wasn't about the view or the weather. It described how I died. It said I stayed in the shelter waiting out the storm, fell asleep, and never woke up. Hypothermia, it said. Body found 2 weeks later. The writing was matter of fact, almost clinical, like I was documenting my own death with detachment. At the bottom, I'd written, "Don't make the same mistake I did. Leave now." But that didn't make sense. If I died here, how did I write the entry? How could I warn myself after I was already dead? Thunder cracked directly overhead, and I jumped, my heart hammering. The storm was getting worse, rain coming down so hard I could barely see 10 feet beyond the shelter door. Leaving now would be suicide. The trail would be treacherous, visibility near zero, and I was already getting cold from the temperature drop. But staying seemed equally impossible. I stared at that entry, my entry, trying to understand. 3 days from now. That gave me time. I didn't have to die here today. I could leave when the storm passed, get down to my car, never come back to this cursed place. I flipped through more pages, looking for context, for explanation, and found other entries that made my skin crawl. Someone named Keela had written about finding the shelter in 2019, described having a pleasant night's rest. 2 pages later, there was another entry in what looked like the same handwriting, dated 2022, describing how Keela never made it off the mountain. Someone named Cassian wrote about the beautiful sunrise they'd witnessed from the shelter. The next entry was their obituary, written in their own hand. I looked at the supplies again, seeing them differently now. How old were those cans? How long had those blankets been there? I picked up one of the lanterns and found a date scratched into the base. 1983. This shelter had been here for over 40 years, maybe longer, and people had been dying here. Or maybe not dying, maybe something worse. Maybe getting caught in whatever temporal loop had trapped me the moment I stepped inside and read my own death. I went to the door, ready to risk the storm, ready to take my chances with lightning and rain and slippery trails. The door wouldn't open. It wasn't stuck, wasn't jammed. It opened inward and nothing was blocking it. But when I pulled on it, it moved about an inch and then stopped, like it was hitting an invisible barrier. I put my full weight into it, pulled until my hands ached and my shoulders burned. 1 inch. That's all it would move. The temperature inside the shelter was dropping. I could see my breath now, which made no sense. It was late afternoon in summer, maybe 50 degrees outside even with the storm. It shouldn't be cold enough for visible breath. I wrapped myself in one of the emergency blankets from the supply pile and sat down on the floor, trying to think rationally. The logbook said I died 3 days from now. That meant I had time. The storm would pass, the door would open, and I'd leave. Whatever temporal anomaly existed in this place, I could outlast it. I had enough water in my pack for a day, maybe 2 if I rationed. I had some food. I'd be uncomfortable, but I'd survive. I just had to wait it out and refuse to fulfill the prophecy I'd read. I would not fall asleep. I would not let hypothermia take me. I would stay awake and alert and ready to leave the moment that door would open. Night came fast, the storm blocking what little daylight remained. I tried the door every 15 minutes, pulling with all my strength, but it never moved more than that single inch. Through the gap I could see the trail, see rain hammering down, see lightning illuminating the mountainside in brief, stark flashes. I was trapped, but I was okay. I was still okay. I ate an energy bar from my pack, drank some water, kept moving to stay warm. The temperature kept dropping. By midnight, I was wearing every layer I'd brought, wrapped in 3 emergency blankets and still shivering. I tried to start a fire using some of the old wood supplies in the corner, but everything was too damp and my matches wouldn't catch. I checked the logbook again, reading my entry by phone light. Fell asleep. That was the key phrase. I just had to stay awake. However cold it got, however tired I became, I had to keep my eyes open. I made it until about 3 in the morning before I started having doubts. The cold was deep in my bones now, the kind of cold that makes thinking difficult. I was shivering so hard my teeth were chattering, and I couldn't feel my toes anymore. I kept checking the door obsessively, pulling on it, begging it to open more than 1 inch. It wouldn't. The storm outside hadn't lessened. If anything, it sounded worse. I pulled up my phone to check the weather forecast and then saw something that stopped my heart. The date on my phone was wrong. It showed 3 days from now. The date from the logbook entry. The date of my death. I turned the phone off and back on, thinking it was a glitch. Same date. I checked my watch. Same date. But that was impossible. I'd only been in the shelter for maybe 12 hours. 1 night. Not 3 days. Time couldn't have jumped forward like that. Unless it had. Unless that's what this place did. Unless the moment I read that entry, I sealed my fate and time simply skipped to the inevitable conclusion. I searched through my pack with numb fingers, looking for anything that might help, and found something I didn't pack. A small piece of paper folded with my handwriting on it. The note said, "I know you think you can change this." I thought the same thing. You're reading this 3 days after you entered the shelter, though it feels like 1 night. The door won't open until you accept what's happening. You have to write the entry. You have to warn the next one. That's the only way out. I looked at the logbook, at the pen lying beside it. Every person who died here had written their own death into that book. Every one of them had documented their end and warned the next person. And then the next person had done the same thing. We were all trying to save whoever came after us, creating an endless chain of warnings that nobody could heed, because by the time they read them, it was too late. I picked up the pen. My hands were so cold I could barely hold it. I opened the logbook to a blank page and stared at it for a long time. If I wrote the entry, I'd be accepting my death. I'd be admitting I couldn't escape. But if I didn't write it, would I be trapped here forever? Would I freeze in this moment, in this shelter, forever caught between life and death, because I refused to document my ending? I started writing. I described entering the shelter. I described the storm. I described finding the logbook and reading my own death. I described the cold, the fear, the impossible time skip. And then I wrote that I died here, that hypothermia took me in my sleep, that my body was found 2 weeks later. I wrote it all in past tense, like I was already dead, like I was documenting from beyond whatever veil separated living from not living. At the bottom I wrote, "Don't make the same mistake I did. Leave now." But I knew it wouldn't matter. The next person would read it after they were already trapped, just like I had. When I finished writing, the door opened, not 1 inch, all the way. It swung open easily, smoothly, like it had never been stuck at all. The storm had passed. Dawn light was breaking over the mountains, pale and cold. I stood up, my body aching and numb, and walked to the doorway. I looked back at the shelter. at the logbook lying open on the crate, at the entry I'd just written in my own hand describing my own death. Then I stepped outside. The air was clear and sharp, the kind of cold that comes after storms. My car was 3 miles away, down a trail that would be muddy and treacherous. I started walking, and with every step, I kept expecting to collapse. Kept expecting the hypothermia I'd written about to claim me. But it didn't. I made it to the trail, made it down the mountain, made it to my car, drove home. I survived. I didn't die in that shelter despite what I'd written, despite what the logbook said. But 3 weeks later, I saw a news report. A hiker's body had been found in an emergency shelter on Mount Rainier, dead of hypothermia. The body had been there for approximately 2 weeks. When they showed the photo of the victim for identification purposes, I saw my own face, my exact face. The same clothes I'd been wearing that day, the same backpack, the same everything. I'm still here, I'm still alive. But somewhere on that mountain, there's a version of me that died exactly as written, and I don't know which one of us is real anymore. I check my reflection every day, looking for signs that I'm fading, that I'm the ghost and the corpse on the mountain was the real me. I can't go back there, can't check, because I'm terrified of what I'll find in that logbook now. Terrified that there's a new entry in my handwriting, describing how I came back to check and never left again. The 3 of us had been planning this hike for months, and when we finally hit the trail in Gifford-Perchot National Forest that morning, everything felt perfect. Brinley was setting the pace up front like she always did, moving with that easy confidence that comes from years of backcountry experience. Omari was in the middle, occasionally stopping to photograph mushrooms or interesting bark patterns, his camera always at the ready. I brought up the rear, comfortable with letting them lead since they'd both hiked this area before, and I hadn't. The trail wound through old-growth forest, where the canopy was so thick that even at late morning, the light had that greenish underwater quality. Moss covered everything, cushioning the ground, draping from branches, softening the edges of fallen logs that had been decomposing for decades. The air smelled like earth and moisture and growing things. And for the first few hours, we barely talked, just enjoying the rhythm of walking and the quiet of the forest. Around noon, Brinley stopped abruptly and held up her hand. Omari and I froze behind her, listening. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual, just the normal sounds of the forest, or what I thought were normal sounds. Then I realized what was missing. There were no birds, no insects. The forest had gone completely silent, except for our breathing and the soft crunch of our boots on the trail. "Do you hear that?" Brinley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I strained to listen, and then I caught it. Branches breaking, but not close. Somewhere off to our left, deeper in the forest. A steady crack, crack, crack like someone walking through a heavy undergrowth. "Probably just an elk," Omari said, but he didn't sound convinced. We waited, listening. The sounds continued, maintaining the same distance from us, moving parallel to the trail. When we started walking again, the sounds matched our pace. When we stopped, they stopped. "That's not an elk," I said, and neither of them argued. We picked up our pace, not quite running but moving faster than before. The sounds in the forest kept pace with us, always off to the left, always just far enough that we couldn't see what was making them. Then we heard it from the right side too. More branches breaking, more footsteps or whatever they were, moving through the undergrowth in rhythm with the sounds on the left. We were being paralleled on both sides. Brinley pulled out her phone. No signal, which we'd expected this deep in. But she checked anyway. "We're about 4 miles from the trailhead," she said, studying her downloaded map. "If we keep moving, we can be back at the car in less than 2 hours." That sounded like a good plan. That sounded like the only plan. We started moving faster, close to jogging now, and the sounds on either side of us kept perfect pace. That's when I heard it behind us. The same branch-breaking, footstep-heavy sounds, but now coming from the trail we just walked. We were surrounded. "Stop," I said, and we all halted in the middle of the trail. The sound stopped instantly. Complete silence again, oppressive and unnatural. We stood in a tight group, backs to each other, scanning the forest in every direction. I couldn't see anything moving. The undergrowth was thick enough that visibility extended maybe 20 or 30 feet before everything became a tangle of ferns and salal and young trees. Whatever was out there could be right at the edge of our sight, and we wouldn't know it. "What do we do?" Omari asked, and I realized he was looking at me like I had answers. I didn't. I had fear and confusion and a growing certainty that we'd walked into something that didn't follow normal rules. "We keep moving," Brindley said. "Toward the trailhead. Fast. Don't stop, don't look back. Just move." It seemed like the best option we had. We started walking again, nearly running now, our packs bouncing uncomfortably with the pace. The sounds resumed immediately. Left, right, behind, all keeping perfect time with us. Then Omari made a choking sound and grabbed my arm. "Look at the trees," he said. I looked, and my brain refused to process what I was seeing at first. The trees on our left were leaning toward the trail, not dramatically, not falling, just tilted inward by maybe 10 or 15 degrees. Trees that thick, that old, don't lean without reason. I looked right and saw the same thing. The trees on both sides of the trail were angling inward, creating a canopy above us that was closing in. "That's not possible," Brindley said, but her voice was shaking. "Trees don't move like that." Except they were moving. As we watched, they leaned a little more, their trunks creaking with the strain. The sound was all around us now, not just from the undergrowth, but from the trees themselves. That same cracking, breaking sound, but amplified, coming from dozens of trees simultaneously. The trail ahead of us was getting darker as the canopy closed, and I realized we had maybe minutes before the trees completely blocked out the sky. We ran. There was no strategy, no discussion, just pure panic driving us forward. Our packs slammed against our backs, our breath came in ragged gasps, and behind us, the forest was moving. I could hear it, could almost feel it. Trees shifting and groaning and reaching toward us. Brindley was the fastest, pulling ahead, then Omari, then me bringing up the rear. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The trail behind us was gone. Where we'd just been running was now blocked by trees that had bent completely over, their canopies touching the ground like they were booing. The forest was closing behind us like a mouth, and we were being swallowed. "Don't stop," Brindley shouted, and I focused forward again, pushing my legs harder than I'd ever pushed them. The trees ahead were leaning too, trying to close the path before we could reach it. But we were moving fast enough that we stayed ahead of them. Then the sounds changed. Not behind us anymore, not parallel to us. Ahead. Something was ahead of us on the trail, and it was coming closer. I could see Brindley slow down, uncertainty crossing her face, but there was nowhere else to go. Behind us was impossible. The sides were too dense to push through. Forward was our only option, even if something was waiting there. The sound resolved into footsteps, and then I saw them. Figures on the trail ahead, multiple figures walking toward us out of the darkness where the trees had already closed. They were human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Their movements too synchronized, their proportions slightly off. As they got closer, I realized why they looked wrong. They looked like us. 3 figures matching our size, our build, our gear. We were looking at ourselves walking toward us on the trail. We all stopped dead. Behind me, I could feel the trees still moving, still closing in. But ahead was something worse. The 3 figures that looked like us kept walking closer, their movements perfectly synchronized with each other, but slightly off from how humans actually move. It was like watching puppets operated by someone who'd studied human movement, but never quite mastered it. Brynlee in front, Omari in the middle, me in the back, just like our actual formation. But wrong. Their faces were obscured by shadow, despite there being no direct light source to create shadows that dark. "We need to go around them," Omari said, his voice high and tight with fear. "Through the undergrowth. Now." We didn't wait to see if the figures would react. We crashed into the forest on the right side of the trail, pushing through salal bushes and ferns, branches whipping at our faces. The vegetation was thick, but not impossible, and we forced our way through with desperate energy. Behind us, I could hear the figures leave the trail too, crashing through the undergrowth with movements that sounded too fast, too efficient. We burst through a particularly dense thicket and found ourselves in a small clearing, maybe 15 feet across. We stopped to catch our breath and get our bearings. That's when I realized Brynlee was staring at something on the ground. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. There were 3 backpacks lying in the dirt. Our backpacks, the exact same color, same brand, same wear patterns. I looked down at my shoulders. I was still wearing my pack. So were Brynlee and Omari. But there they were on the ground, 3 packs identical to ours. "This isn't real," Omari said, backing away from them. "None of this is real. We're hallucinating. Carbon monoxide or spores or something in the air making us see things." But we all knew that wasn't true. This felt too real, too solid. The forest around us was wrong in ways that went beyond hallucination. Brynlee knelt down and unzipped one of the packs on the ground. Inside were clothes, food, water bottles, all the supplies you'd expect. She pulled out a wallet from the top pocket and opened it. Her own face stared back at her from the driver's license inside. "We need to keep moving," I said, because I couldn't process what we were seeing, and staying still felt like death. We left the clearing, leaving the duplicate packs behind, and kept pushing through the forest parallel to where we thought the trail should be. The trees weren't leaning here like they had been on the trail, but the sounds were back. Footsteps all around us, branch breaking, and now something else. Voices, our voices. I could hear myself calling out, asking where everyone went. I could hear Brynlee yelling for us to wait up. I could hear Omari saying he was lost, he couldn't find the trail. The voices came from every direction, echoing through the forest, our own words spoken by our own voices, but saying things we'd never said. "Cover your ears," Brynlee commanded. And we did, pressing our palms hard against the sides of our heads. But we could still hear them. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside our heads, resonating in our skulls. We stumbled into another clearing, bigger this time, and stopped short. There were 3 figures standing in the center with their backs to us. 3 figures wearing our clothes, with our builds, our hair. They weren't moving, just standing there facing away, perfectly still. We stood at the edge of the clearing, afraid to move forward, afraid to go back. Then, in perfect unison, All three figures turned around. They had our faces, exact replicas, down to the smallest detail. But their eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty, like looking into deep water at night. The figure that looked like Brinley smiled, and it was her smile, but stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. "You shouldn't have come here," it said in Brinley's voice. "This forest doesn't let people leave. It just makes copies and sends them back. The real ones stay." The thing that looked like me tilted its head at an angle that was almost right, but not quite. "You've been here before, all of you. You just don't remember. We remember, though. We're the ones who made it out last time." I looked at Brinley and Omari, saw the same confusion and terror in their faces that I felt. "That's not possible," Omari said, but his voice shook. "We've never been here before. This is my first time on this trail." The thing wearing his face laughed. "That's what you thought last time too, and the time before. The forest keeps you, makes new versions, sends them home. How many of you do you think are out there living your lives? How many copies has this place made?" My mind was reeling, trying to reject what it was hearing, but unable to come up with any other explanation for what we'd experienced. The time-matched footsteps, the closing trees, the duplicate gear, seeing ourselves on the trail. What if we weren't the originals? What if we were copies sent back who'd somehow wandered into the wrong place and found the truth? "Let us go," Brinley said, and there was steel in her voice despite her fear. "Let us leave, and we won't tell anyone about this place." The three figures laughed in unison, a sound that echoed wrong, like it was coming from everywhere at once. "You can't leave," they said together. "You're already here. You've always been here. When you think you're going home, you're just going to another version of here. The forest is everywhere now. It's learned how to spread." That's when I noticed the trees around the clearing were changing. Their bark was smooth where it should be rough. Their branches grew in spiral patterns that hurt to look at. And through gaps in the canopy above, the sky was the wrong color. Not blue, not gray, but something in between that didn't have a name. "Run," I said, and we did. We ran past the figures, through the clearing, into the forest on the other side. We didn't try to navigate or find the trail anymore. We just ran in a straight line, away from those things with our faces, away from the clearing, away from everything. Branches tore at us, roots tried to trip us, but we kept going. I don't know how long we ran. Time had stopped making sense. It could have been minutes or hours. Then suddenly we broke through the tree line and stumbled onto a parking lot. Our parking lot. My car was sitting exactly where I'd left it that morning. We stood there gasping, looking at each other, checking that we were all still together. All three of us, all real, all alive. We got in the car without speaking, and I drove. None of us looked back at the trailhead. We drove straight to the nearest ranger station, 15 miles down the highway, and tried to report what happened. The ranger listened politely, took notes, and told us that sometimes the forest plays tricks on people. Elevation, dehydration, panic attacks. He'd heard stories like ours before. He seemed unconcerned, almost bored. As we left, I saw him crumple up the report and toss it in the trash. We went home. We tried to go back to normal. But normal was impossible after that. Because a week later, I saw Omari at a coffee shop downtown. He saw me at the same moment and froze. We both knew we hadn't planned to meet there. We approached each other carefully. "How long have you been back?" I asked. He looked confused. "Back from what?" "I've been home since yesterday. The hike was yesterday." My hike had been a week ago. Different memories of the same event. I called Brinley. She answered on the second ring and immediately asked, "Is this the one from July or September?" I didn't understand the question. She explained that she'd gotten 3 calls now from different versions of Omari and me, all claiming we'd just gotten back from that hike, all with slightly different memories of when it happened. The forest had sent back multiple copies. We started comparing notes, finding others. There are at least 7 versions of me that we know of, maybe more. Each one thinks they're the original. Each one has slightly different memories of that day. Some remember the figures more clearly. Some don't remember the clearing with the duplicate packs. Some remember the voices, others don't. But we all remember running. We all remember escaping, or thinking we escaped. I look at my reflection every morning and try to figure out if I'm real or just another copy. I check my memories, testing them for inconsistencies. But how would I know what's real and what's been edited? The forest learned how to make us. It learned how to spread by sending us back into the world, carriers of whatever it is, seeds of something that's slowly replacing everything we thought was real. Sometimes I get calls from myself, other versions asking the same questions I'm asking. We compare notes. We try to figure out who's the original. But I think the truth is, there is no original anymore. We're all copies of copies. And somewhere deep in Gifford Pinchot National Forest, the real versions of us are still there. Still running, still trying to escape a forest that's already escaped into us. I'd been planning this summit attempt for 6 months, training for it, obsessing over weather windows and route conditions. When I finally set out before dawn to climb a North Cascades peak, I felt ready for anything. The approach was straightforward, a solid trail leading to the alpine zone, then scrambling over talus and snow patches to reach the summit. I'm an experienced mountaineer, comfortable with exposure and technical terrain, and this peak was well within my abilities. The climb went perfectly. I reached the summit at 9 in the morning, stood there taking photos and eating a protein bar while admiring the 360-degree views of wilderness stretching to every horizon. It was one of those perfect moments that make all the training and early mornings worth it. Then I started my descent, carefully picking my way down the loose rock, following the same route I'd climbed. 20 minutes into the descent, I summited again. I stood at the top, confused, looking at the same rocks I'd just been standing on, the same views I'd just photographed. My first thought was that I'd gotten turned around somehow, climbed back up instead of down. But I'd been watching my route carefully. I'd been descending. I knew I had. I checked my watch. It showed 23 minutes since I'd left the summit the first time. I checked my GPS. It showed me at the summit coordinates. I looked at my phone photos. The last one was time-stamped 23 minutes ago, the summit shot I'd taken before descending. This didn't make sense. I started down again, this time paying even closer attention to my direction, constantly checking my compass, making sure I was heading downhill. The terrain matched what I'd climbed. Same rock formations, same patches of old snow, same scramble sections. I descended for what felt like 30 minutes, working my way down carefully. And then I was at the summit again. Third time at the top. My watch now showed I'd been descending for 51 minutes total. My GPS confirmed I was at the summit, but I hadn't climbed back up. I'd been going down the entire time. I was certain of it. I sat down on the rocks, trying to think rationally. Altitude sickness could cause confusion, but I felt fine. Dehydration could affect judgment, but I'd been drinking regularly. I wasn't tired, wasn't dizzy, wasn't experiencing any physical symptoms that would explain this. I pulled out my map and studied the terrain. The summit was the highest point for miles. There was no way to accidentally circle back to it. You either went up or down, and down led to lower elevations, to the trail, to the parking area. There was no loop, no way to end up back at the top unless you deliberately climbed back up. I started my descent again, this time moving faster, almost scrambling recklessly. I didn't care about the careful route finding anymore. I just wanted to get down, to prove to myself that gravity still worked, that down still meant down. I summited for the fourth time. The sun had moved. It was higher in the sky now, closer to noon, which meant hours had passed. But my watch said I'd only been descending for an hour and 15 minutes since my first attempt to go down. Time and space weren't matching up. I was stuck in some kind of loop, endlessly reaching the summit no matter which direction I traveled. I tried a different approach. Instead of following the standard route down, I picked a random direction and started descending a face I hadn't climbed. Steep and loose, but manageable. I figured if the normal route was somehow cursed or broken, maybe a different path would work. I scrambled down carefully, placing each foot with precision on the unstable rock. The terrain got steeper. I had to down-climb some sections that were nearly vertical, finding handholds and cracks and edges. This was definitely new terrain. I'd never been here before. I was making progress, real progress. Then the rock face leveled out, and I found myself standing on the summit again. Fifth summit. I started laughing, a high, slightly unhinged sound that echoed off the surrounding peaks. This was impossible. I'd just climbed down a face that was on the opposite side of the mountain from where I'd started. There was no conceivable way I could end up at the summit again unless the entire mountain was somehow curved back on itself in dimensions I couldn't perceive. I walked around the summit area, looking for anything different, any clue about what was happening. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a body on the rocks about 30 feet from the true summit. I approached carefully, my heart pounding. The body was face down, wearing mountaineering gear, a pack still on its back. The clothing looked weathered, like it had been exposed to sun and wind for a long time. I knelt down beside it, reluctant to touch it, but needing to see. I carefully turned the body over, and my blood turned to ice. I was looking at my own face. The body was me. Same features, same build, wearing the same jacket I was wearing, the same boots. But the body was desiccated, mummified by altitude and cold, clearly dead for weeks or maybe months. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. I was alive. I was here. That couldn't be me lying dead on the summit. I checked the body's pockets with shaking hands and found a wallet. My wallet, my ID, my credit cards, my photos. Everything that should be in my wallet currently in my pocket was also in this wallet. But these items looked older, more worn. I looked at the ID photo. It was me, but the expiration date was 3 years from now. This was a version of me from the future, a version that had died here on this summit. I stood up and backed away from the body, trying to process this. If that was me from the future, dead after getting trapped in the same loop I was trapped in now, did that mean my fate was already sealed? Was I looking at my inevitable end? I checked my own pack, my own pockets. Everything was there. Everything was normal. I was alive and healthy. But so had that version been probably before it got stuck here and eventually ran out of food and water and strength. I started my 6th descent, moving with frantic energy now. I had to break this loop. I had to find a way off this mountain before I became the body I'd just found. I ran down the slope, no longer caring about safety, just about speed and distance. I slipped and slid and scrambled, covering ground fast. The summit appeared again, and this time I wasn't surprised. This time I expected it. But I noticed something different. There were two bodies now. The first was the one I'd found, the future me. The second was newer, fresher. I approached it slowly, dreading what I'd find. It was me again. But this version had only been dead for maybe a day or two. The body was in the same position I'd been in when I'd stopped to rest during my third descent, sitting on a rock, head slumped forward. I touched its shoulder and the body toppled over, stiff with rigor mortis. This version of me had simply stopped, given up, and died sitting there on the summit. How many attempts had this version made before surrendering? How many times had it descended only to summit again? I was looking at my own future, not just once, but twice now. Two different versions of how I'd die here. Unless I found a way to break the pattern, I'd become a third body, then a fourth, accumulating on the summit like evidence of failures, each one a version of me that couldn't escape. I forced myself to think. There had to be a pattern, a reason this was happening. Mountains don't just trap people in loops. Physics doesn't work that way. Unless this wasn't about physics. Unless this was about something else entirely. I examined the two bodies more carefully, looking for clues. The future version, the mummified one, had a notebook in its jacket pocket. I pulled it out with trembling hands and opened it. The pages were filled with my handwriting, entries documenting descents. Attempt 47, summited again. Tried descending the north face, same result. Attempt 63, summited, starting to see multiple versions of my body, 3 now. Attempt 89, no longer counting, bodies everywhere. I think I understand now. The mountain isn't trapping me. I'm already dead. This is the moment. The fall I took on attempt 7. Everything after has been my mind processing death. Infinite loop of the last thought. I flipped to the last entry, the handwriting shaky and barely legible. Attempt unknown. If you're reading this, you're me. You're another iteration. The only way out is to stop trying to descend. Stop fighting it. Accept the summit as the end. I threw the notebook down, refusing to accept that. I wasn't dead. I was here, alive, thinking, feeling. My heart was pounding, my hands were sweating, my legs were tired from climbing. Dead. People don't feel tired. Dead people don't sweat. This was real. I was real. And there had to be a way off this mountain that didn't involve becoming another corpse. I started my 7th descent. But this time I did something different. I didn't try to follow any route. I didn't try to navigate rationally. I just closed my eyes and jumped. I launched myself off the summit in a direction I hadn't tried, letting gravity take me, sliding and tumbling down loose scree. Rocks tore at my clothes, scraped my skin, but I didn't try to stop myself. I fell and slid and bounced for what felt like forever, my body taking impacts, pain blooming everywhere, and then I slammed into something solid and stopped. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the summit rocks, exactly where I'd been standing when I jumped. Not a scratch on me. No torn clothes, no blood, no pain. I'd fallen for minutes, felt every impact, and somehow ended up back where I started completely uninjured. This wasn't a spatial loop. This was something worse. I stood up and screamed, a raw sound of frustration and fear that echoed off the surrounding peaks. As my scream faded, I heard something echo back that wasn't quite right. It was my scream, but layered, multiple voices screaming at slightly different pitches. I spun around and saw them. Bodies. Dozens of bodies scattered across the summit area, all in different states of decay, all wearing my face. Some looked fresh, some were skeletal, some were mummified. All of them were me, all versions that had gotten trapped here and eventually given up. I walked among them, seeing the different ways I'd died. One version had clearly frozen to death curled in a fetal position. Another had trauma to the skull like it had bashed its head against the rocks. Another looked like it had simply laid down and stopped breathing. Each death was different, but they all ended the same way. Here, on this summit. I sat down among my own corpses and tried to think. The notebook had said to stop trying to descend, to accept the summit as the end. But what did that mean? Just sit here and die? Add myself to the collection? There had to be another interpretation. I pulled out my own phone, surprised it still had battery. The GPS was useless, just showing me at the summit coordinates over and over. But I opened my photos. I scrolled through the images I'd taken today. The summit shots, the approach, the sunrise from the trail. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the background of my sunrise photo, barely visible on the horizon, was a figure standing on a distant peak. I zoomed in. It was me. I was in the photo, on a mountain I hadn't climbed, taken hours before I saw the image. I scrolled to other photos. There I was in the background of a talus field shot, a tiny figure descending when I should have been ascending. There I was reflected in an ice patch, facing a different direction than I was facing when I took the photo. I was in all of my photos, always in the background, always doing something I hadn't done yet or had already done. I was haunting my own timeline. That's when I understood. The mountain had entrapped me. I'd trapped myself the moment I decided to climb it. Every version of me that had attempted this summit had created a loop, and all those loops existed simultaneously, overlapping, intersecting. I wasn't experiencing a single repeated descent. I was experiencing all possible descents at once, and they all led back to the summit because that's where all the loops originated. The summit was the nexus point, the place where every version of me converged. To escape, I didn't need to descend. I needed to never have ascended. But that was impossible. I'd already climbed. I'd already summited. The past was fixed. Except here it wasn't. Here, with dozens of versions of myself scattered across the rocks, with time folding back on itself in impossible ways, maybe the past wasn't fixed at all. Maybe I could unmake the decision to climb. I closed my eyes and focused, trying to remember the exact moment I decided to attempt this peak. 6 months ago, sitting at my kitchen table, looking at maps, choosing this summit out of dozens of possible options. I tried to feel that moment, to reach back through time and touch it. I visualized myself at that table, seeing the map, and I changed the memory. In my mind, I chose a different peak. I pointed to a different name on the map. I planned a different climb. When I opened my eyes, the bodies were gone. The summit was empty except for me. I stood up slowly, afraid to disturb whatever had changed. The sun was in a different position earlier in the sky. My watch showed a different time, hours earlier. My GPS showed different coordinates. I wasn't on the peak I'd been trapped on. I was on a different summit entirely, one I'd never climbed before. I started descending, my heart in my throat, waiting for the loop to catch me again. I scrambled down talus, traversed a snow field, worked my way through the scramble sections. The terrain was unfamiliar, but it felt real, felt solid. I kept descending, down and down. not looking back, not stopping. An hour passed. 2 hours. The alpine gave way to forest. The forest gave way to trail. The trail led to a parking lot where a car I didn't recognize was waiting. Not my car. A different vehicle, keys in my pocket for it, registration in the glove box with my name. I'd changed the past, and the past had changed the present. Everything was slightly different now, similar enough that I recognized it, different enough that I knew it wasn't the same timeline I'd left. I drove home, or to what I thought was home. The address was the same, but the house was painted a different color. My key worked, but the furniture inside was arranged differently. Photos on the wall showed me on different climbs, different peaks, a different history of mountaineering achievements. In none of the photos was the peak I'd been trapped on. I'd erased it from my timeline by choosing to never climb it, and reality had filled in the gaps with alternatives. I should have felt relieved. I'd escaped. But I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. Because I knew somewhere, on a summit I'd chosen not to climb, there were still bodies. Still versions of me who'd made different choices, who'd climbed that peak in other timelines and gotten trapped. They were still there, still dying over and over, still trying to descend from a summit they'd never leave. And I knew that if I ever went back, if I ever tried to climb that peak again in this timeline or any other, I'd join them. Sometimes I dream about the summit. I see the bodies, see myself scattered across the rocks in various states of death. Sometimes I wake up not sure which version I am, the one who escaped or one of the ones still trapped, dreaming of escape. I stopped mountaineering after that. Can't risk it. Can't risk choosing the wrong peak and finding myself back in a loop. But lately I've been having a terrible thought. What if I never really escaped? What if this life, this timeline where I chose a different peak, is just another loop? What if I'm still on that summit, still trapped, and this entire existence is just my mind creating an elaborate escape fantasy while my body slowly dies on those rocks? I have no way to know, no way to tell. All I can do is keep living this version of events and hope it's real. Hope that when I close my eyes at night, I'll wake up in the same timeline in the morning. Because every day I'm terrified I'll open my eyes and be standing on that summit again, surrounded by my own corpses, starting the descents that never end. Keela and I found the abandoned logging camp purely by accident. We'd taken a wrong turn somewhere on the trail system in the Willapa Hills, ended up on an old overgrown road we didn't recognize, and decided to follow it just to see where it led. The afternoon light was beautiful, that golden hour glow filtering through second-growth forest, and we weren't in any hurry to get back to the car. The road wound through Douglas firs and alders for maybe half a mile before opening into a clearing where the remnants of the camp sat quietly rotting. There were several collapsed structures, rusted equipment half buried in moss and ferns, and the skeleton of what might have been a mess hall or bunkhouse. The place had clearly been abandoned for decades, 40 years at least, based on the size of the trees growing through the old foundations. We walked through carefully, taking photos, marveling at how quickly nature reclaims what humans leave behind. That's when we heard the children. Laughter, high and bright, echoing through the trees. Then singing, a nursery rhyme I half recognized, but couldn't quite place. The voices were clear, multiple children, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and they sounded close. Keela and I exchanged confused glances. This camp was miles from any trailhead, deep in forest with no nearby residences. There shouldn't be children out here. We called out, asking if anyone needed help, if anyone was lost. The laughter continued, but it sounded wrong now that I was paying attention. It was moving in ways that didn't make sense. Closer when we moved away from it. Distant when we walked toward it. Sometimes it seemed to come from above us, up in the canopy. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from underground, muffled and hollow. We stopped calling out and just listened, trying to pinpoint the location. The singing was clearer now. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. The children's voices chanted it over and over. But the rhythm was off, too slow, stretching the words out in a way that made my skin crawl. Keela grabbed my arm and pointed. There, at the edge of the clearing near one of the collapsed structures, was a toy. A stuffed rabbit sitting upright against a mossy log. It looked new, not just well-preserved, but actually new, like it had been placed there recently. The fur was clean, the colors bright, no weathering or fading. We approached it slowly, and as we got closer, I saw more toys. A red ball sitting in the center of what used to be the camp's main yard. A jump rope coiled in a perfect circle on top of a rusted barrel. A set of jacks scattered on a flat rock, the metal ball resting exactly in the center. All of them looked brand new, impossibly fresh in a camp that had been abandoned since the early 80s. The children's laughter rang out again, this time so close it felt like they were standing right behind us. We spun around but saw nothing. The clearing was empty, except for the ruins and the toys and us. Keela's breathing was getting fast and shallow, the first signs of panic. "We should go," she said, and I completely agreed. We started walking quickly back toward the overgrown road, but the singing followed us. It was all around us now, voices coming from every direction, still chanting that same nursery rhyme in that same too-slow cadence. I looked back at the clearing and saw more toys. A dozen of them now, arranged in a circle around where we'd been standing. They definitely hadn't been there a minute ago. We started running, and that's when the laughter changed. It got higher, more frantic, and underneath it, I could hear something else. Not laughter. Something pretending to laugh, mimicking the sound, but getting it slightly wrong. We made it about 50 yards down the old road before Keela stopped dead. I nearly crashed into her from behind. "Look," she whispered, pointing ahead. More toys. They were placed along the road in a line, one every few feet, leading deeper into the forest away from where we'd come. A doll, a toy truck, a plastic tea set, a wooden alphabet block, all of them bright and new and arranged like markers on a path. The singing was louder now, more insistent, and I realized the voices were trying to lead us. They were herding us away from the trail, deeper into the woods, using the toys as bait or breadcrumbs. "Don't follow them," I said, grabbing Keela's hand. "We go back the way we came. Ignore the toys, ignore the voices. Just focus on getting to the trail." She nodded, and we turned around. But the road behind us had changed. More toys, hundreds of them now, scattered across the road and into the forest on both sides. Stuffed animals and balls and dolls and games, all arranged in increasingly complex patterns, circles and spirals and shapes that hurt to look at too directly. The singing had stopped. Now there was just silence, heavy and expectant. And in that silence I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision. Every time I turned my head to look directly at something, it was still. But in the corner of my eye, things were moving. The toys were shifting position, rearranging themselves, crawling or rolling or walking when I wasn't looking straight at them. Keela saw it too. I could tell by the way she'd gone rigid beside me, her hand crushing mine. "They're not toys," she said, her voice barely audible. "They're not toys. There's something else wearing toy shapes." The laughter started again, but this time I could see where it was coming from. Shadows in the forest, child-sized, standing among the trees, but not quite touching the ground. They were translucent, barely visible, and they moved wrong. Not walking or running, but jerking from position to position like stop-motion animation, like something that had learned about movement from watching but didn't understand how it actually worked. There were dozens of them now, surrounding us in a loose circle, all watching, all making that not quite right laughter sound. One of them was closer than the others, near enough that I could almost make out features. It looked like a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a dress that might have been from the 50s or 60s. But her face was blurred, indistinct, and her eyes were too large and too dark. When she tilted her head to look at us, it tilted too far, almost 90 degrees, and the movement was instant, no transition. "What do you want?" Keela called out to them, and I wished she hadn't. Engaging with them felt like a mistake, like acknowledging their presence gave them permission for something. The Not children didn't answer with words. Instead, they all moved at once, jerking closer in perfect synchronization, cutting the distance between us in half without appearing to cross the space. Now they were close enough that I could see more details, and I desperately wished I couldn't. Their translucent forms were filled with something that moved, something dark and fluid that shifted inside their child-shaped containers. Their mouths were open in laughter, but the mouths were too wide, too empty. I grabbed Keela and pulled her in a random direction, crashing off the road into the dense undergrowth. We pushed through salal and ferns, branches whipping our faces, moving as fast as the vegetation would allow. Behind us, the laughter followed, always the same distance away no matter how fast we moved. We burst into another small clearing and stopped short. The toys were here too. They'd somehow gotten ahead of us, arranged in an even more complex pattern. In the center of the pattern was a tea party setup. 4 small chairs around a low table, plastic cups and saucers laid out perfectly, a stuffed bear sitting in one of the chairs. 3 chairs were empty, waiting. The Not children emerged from the forest around us, their jerky movements bringing them to the edge of the clearing, but no further. They stood there, watching, and one of them raised its arm and pointed at the empty chairs. The gesture was unmistakable. They wanted us to sit. They wanted us to join their tea party. Keela was shaking, her teeth chattering despite the warm afternoon. "What happens if we sit?" she asked. "What happens if we don't?" I replied, because I had a terrible feeling that refusing was worse than accepting. The Not children were blocking every direction out of the clearing. The only open space was around the tea party setup. They were giving us one option, one choice. We stood frozen at the edge of that clearing, every instinct screaming at us to run. But there was nowhere to go. The Not children surrounded us in their loose circle, those translucent child-shaped things with their wrong movements and too large eyes. They weren't advancing anymore, just waiting, watching with impatience that felt ancient and hungry. The tea party setup sat in the center like bait in a trap. Those 3 empty chairs arranged around the low table, with its plastic cups and saucers. The stuffed bear in the 4th chair stared at us with button eyes that seemed far too aware. I could feel Keela trembling beside me, could hear her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My own heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, taste copper and fear on my tongue. "Maybe we should sit," I whispered, the words feeling like surrender even as I said them. "Maybe if we play along, they'll let us go." Keela looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. But I couldn't see another option. Every direction out of the clearing was blocked by those things, and they were so clearly waiting for us to make a choice. Accept their invitation or what? I didn't want to find out what happened if we refused. We moved toward the tea party set up slowly, carefully, like we were approaching wild animals. The Not children didn't react, didn't move, just watched with those horrible, too dark eyes. When we reached the chairs, I could see more details that made my stomach turn. The plastic cups had something in them, a thick, dark liquid that definitely wasn't tea. The saucers had what looked like crackers, but they were moving slightly, pulsing like they were breathing. The bear in the fourth chair had a smile stitched onto its face, but the stitching was fresh, the thread still bright, and there were stains on its paws that looked disturbingly like old blood. Keela sat in one of the small chairs, her knees bent awkwardly because the furniture was child-sized. I took the chair across from her, my back to the forest, to the Not children. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could feel them there, watching, their presence like ice against my spine. The moment we sat, the singing started again. That same nursery rhyme, "Ring around the rosy," but now I could hear the words more clearly, and they weren't quite right. Ring around the bones here, pockets full of stones here, ashes, ashes, we don't go down. The melody was the same, but the lyrics had been corrupted into something darker, something that sounded less like a children's game and more like a warning or a curse. One of the Not children jerked into view beside the table, that stop-motion movement bringing it from the forest edge to right next to us without any transition. Up close, it was worse. So much worse. I could see that the dark fluid moving inside its translucent form was full of things. Shapes that might have been organs or bones or something else entirely, all suspended in that liquid darkness, all moving independently. It reached out with a hand that flickered between solid and transparent and picked up one of the cups. The movement was wrong, the joints bending at angles that human joints shouldn't bend, the fingers too long and with too many segments. It held the cup out to Keela, offering it, and I realized with horror that it expected her to drink. "Don't," I said, my voice cracking. But another Not child was already beside me, offering me a cup in that same horrible flickering hand. The dark liquid inside smelled like earth and decay, and something sweet that made my gorge rise. We couldn't drink this. We couldn't put this inside ourselves. But refusing felt equally impossible. The Not children were waiting, and in their terrible patience, I could sense the shape of what would happen if we said no. They would stop pretending to be children. They would stop pretending to be anything harmless at all. Keela's hand was shaking so badly, the cup rattled against her teeth when she raised it to her lips. I wanted to scream at her to stop, to throw it down, to run. But I was raising my own cup, my body moving without my permission, compelled by fear or something worse. The liquid touched my lips, and it was cold. So cold it burned, and the taste was indescribable. Not bitter or sweet or sour, but something else. Something my tongue had no reference for. Something that tasted like it wasn't meant to exist in this reality. I forced myself to swallow and felt it slide down my throat like ice water and oil and darkness, felt it hit my stomach and spread cold through my entire body. Across from me, Keela had done the same, her face gone pale, her eyes wide with shock and revulsion. The Not children made sounds that might have been approval, might have been laughter, might have been something else entirely. They jerked back to the edge of the clearing in that disturbing stop-motion way, and the circle around us widened. One of them pointed toward the forest, toward a gap in the trees that I was certain hadn't been there before. A path leading out, away from the clearing, away from the tea party and the toys and the abandoned logging camp. They were letting us go. We'd accepted their invitation, participated in their horrible game, and now we were being released. Keela and I stood on shaking legs and moved toward that gap in the trees, not quite running, but moving as fast as we could while staying upright. The Not children watched us go with their 2 large eyes, and as we passed them, I saw that there were more of them than I'd thought. Dozens, maybe hundreds, stretching back into the forest as far as I could see, all translucent, all child-shaped, all wrong. We found the trail maybe 20 minutes later, though I couldn't be sure because time had stopped making sense. My watch showed it was still afternoon, but the light felt different, thinner somehow, like we were seeing the world through a filter that hadn't been there before. We hiked back to the car in silence, neither of us able to put words to what we'd experienced. The drive home was the same, just stunned quiet, and the sound of tires on a pavement. We didn't talk about it that night, or the next day, or for weeks after. What was there to say? Who would believe us? But the effects of that tea party, of whatever we'd drunk from those cups, those became impossible to ignore. It started about a week later. I was at work, sitting in a meeting, and I heard children singing. That same corrupted nursery rhyme, ring around the bones here, pockets full of stones here. I looked around, but nobody else seemed to hear it. The singing continued, faint but clear, like it was coming from inside my head. It lasted maybe 30 seconds and then stopped. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that I was still processing trauma from the hike. But it happened again the next day, and the day after that. Always the same song, always that slow, wrong rhythm, always when I was in complete silence. I called Keela, and she admitted she was hearing it too. We compared notes and realized we were hearing it at the exact same times, like whatever was singing to both of us simultaneously, no matter where we were or what we were doing. Then the toys started appearing. I'd come home and find a toy on my doorstep. A small wooden horse one day, a rubber ball the next, a set of jacks after that. All of them looked new, all of them arranged carefully like gifts. I'd throw them away, but more would appear. Keela was experiencing the same thing. We tried to figure out what it meant, what the Not children wanted from us, but we had no answers. The singing continued daily, sometimes multiple times a day. The toys kept appearing, and we both noticed changes in ourselves. We'd developed a resistance to cold that wasn't normal. I could walk outside in freezing temperatures in just a t-shirt and feel perfectly comfortable. Keela discovered she could hold ice cubes in her bare hands until they melted without any discomfort. Our body temperatures had dropped. Not dramatically, not enough to be medically concerning, but enough to notice. We were becoming something else, something changed by whatever we'd consumed at that tea party. 3 months after the incident, I woke up in the middle of the night to find a Not child standing at the foot of my bed. It was the same one that had offered me the cup at the tea party. I recognized the particular way it tilted its head, the specific pattern of darkness moving inside its translucent form. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching me with those 2 large eyes. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream or move or do anything but stare back. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. And then it flickered and was gone, vanished like it had never been there. But it left something behind on my bed. A photograph, old, faded, showing a group of children standing in front of the logging camp, smiling at the camera. The photo was dated 1962. I looked closer and felt my blood turn to ice. One of the children in the photo looked exactly like me. Same face, same build, same features. Another looked like Keela. We were in this photograph from 60 years before we were born. I called Keela immediately, woke her up at 3 in the morning, told her everything. She'd had the same experience that night. Us, not child in her room, watching her, leaving a photograph. The same photo, the same impossible image of us as children in 1962. We met the next morning and tried to make sense of it. Were those our grandparents? Some relatives we didn't know about who looked exactly like us. But the more we looked at the photo, the more we realized it wasn't just similarity, it was identical. Those children had our exact faces, our exact features, down to tiny details like the small scar on Keela's eyebrow from a childhood accident and the slightly crooked pinky finger on my left hand from a break that never healed quite right. Somehow, impossibly, we were in that photo. We had been at that logging camp in 1962, which meant the not children weren't strangers. They were us, or we were them. Or time had folded in on itself in ways that made those distinctions meaningless. The singing got worse after that. It wasn't just in silence anymore. It was constant, a background hum we could hear every waking moment and even in our dreams. The lyrics had changed too. Now they sang our names over and over, weaving them into that corrupted nursery rhyme. Ring around Keela, pockets full of Keela, ashes, ashes, Keela comes back down. Ring around the bones here, pockets full of stones here, follow, follow, come back to the ground. The toys kept appearing, but now they were arranged in specific patterns that we recognized from the clearing, those spirals and circles that hurt to look at. We were being called back. The not children wanted us to return to the logging camp, to complete whatever transformation we'd started when we drank from those cups. We tried to resist. We moved to different cities, changed our phone numbers, told no one where we were going. It didn't matter. The singing followed us. The toys appeared no matter where we lived. And we kept getting colder, our body temperatures dropping degree by degree until we had to pretend to shiver around other people, so they wouldn't notice how unaffected we were by winter weather. Our reflections started to look wrong. Nothing obvious, nothing anyone else would notice, but we could see it. Our edges were becoming less defined, like we were starting to go translucent. We were becoming like them, slowly but inevitably, transforming into not children ourselves. I don't know how much longer we have before the transformation is complete. Weeks, maybe, possibly days. We've stopped running. There's no point. Whatever we drank at that tea party is changing us on a fundamental level, rewriting what we are, pulling us backward or forward through time to join the things we encountered in that clearing. Keela and I talk every day, comparing symptoms, documenting the changes. We're scientists observing our own transformation into something that doesn't fit into any category we have words for. Last night, I jerked across my apartment without meaning to. Moved from my bed to the bathroom in that stop-motion way the not children move. It only happened once, but it will happen again. We're losing our solidity, our presence in normal time and space. Soon we'll be translucent, flickering, moving wrong. Soon we'll be standing in that clearing in the Willapa Hills, arranged with all the others, waiting for the next hikers to wander off the trail and find the abandoned logging camp. If you're reading this, if you're planning to hike in the Willapa Hills, stay on the marked trails. Don't follow old logging roads. Don't investigate abandoned camps. And if you hear children singing where children shouldn't be, if you see toys that look too new in places that are too old, run. Don't stop to investigate. Don't try to help. Don't let them invite you to their tea party. Because once you sit down, once you drink from those cups, you're already one of them. You just don't know it yet. The transformation takes time, but it's inevitable. And when it's complete, you'll join the others in that clearing, translucent and wrong and eternal, waiting to invite the next lost hikers to sit and stay and become. We'll be there soon, Keela and I. We'll be the ones offering cups filled with cold darkness. We'll be the ones singing your name into that corrupted nursery rhyme. We'll be the ones waiting, patient and hungry, for you to accept our invitation. And you will. Everyone does. Because when you're surrounded and scared and see no other option, you'll sit down at that tea party just like we did. You'll drink what we offer you. And then you'll understand that the forest never lets anyone really leave. It just sends back copies while keeping the originals, and eventually the copies get called home. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped onto the trail in Mount Hood National Forest. The path was well maintained, clearly marked, exactly as it appeared on my downloaded maps. But something felt off in a way I couldn't articulate, like the air pressure was wrong or the light was hitting things at slightly incorrect angles. I'm an experienced hiker, done hundreds of miles of trails across the Pacific Northwest, and I've learned to trust my gut. But that day I ignored it. I'd driven 3 hours to get there, taken the day off work, and I wasn't about to turn around because of a vague feeling of unease. So I started walking, settling into the familiar rhythm of boots on packed earth. Pack weight distributed across my shoulders, the forest closing in around me as I left the trailhead behind. The first hour was normal. Douglas firs towering overhead, understory thick with ferns and salal, the occasional glimpse of a creek running parallel to the trail. I passed a couple coming the other direction, exchanged nods and brief comments about the weather, then continued on alone. The trail started to climb, switchbacks leading up through denser forest where less sunlight penetrated. That's when I noticed the trail was changing. Not dramatically, not in any way I could point to and say definitively what was different. But the path seemed to be narrowing. The trees were closer than they'd been. The undergrowth was encroaching more on the edges. I checked my map and saw I was on the right trail, making good progress, exactly where I should be. But the trail itself felt like it was degrading, becoming less maintained, less traveled, less clearly defined. Another mile and the degradation was obvious. The trail had gone from well-packed earth with clear edges to a rougher path with roots crossing it more frequently. The blazes marking the route were farther apart, older, more faded. I slowed down, paying more attention to navigation, making sure I didn't lose the path. This was still hikeable, still clearly a trail, but it felt like it had been abandoned for a season or two, allowed to grow over slightly. I pulled out my phone to double-check my location. The GPS showed me exactly where I should be, on the main trail, making normal progress. But what I was seeing didn't match. The maps showed a maintained trail with recent maintenance. What I was walking on was becoming overgrown. I told myself it was just poor trail maintenance, budget cuts affecting the Forest Service, nothing to worry about. I kept walking. The trail kept changing. Within another half-mile, it had gone from overgrown to barely visible. I was pushing through brush in places, searching for blazes that were increasingly rare and weathered. The path underfoot was more suggestion than reality, just a slight depression in the forest floor that might indicate people had walked here once. I stopped and pulled out my map again. According to my GPS, I was still on the trail, still moving in the right direction. But the trail itself was disappearing under my feet. This made no sense. Trails don't degrade this fast as you walk them. They don't transform from well-maintained to nearly invisible in the span of 3 miles. I looked back the way I'd come, thinking I'd retrace my steps to where the trail was still clear. but my heart sank. Behind me, the trail was gone. Where I just walked was now dense undergrowth, thick enough that I couldn't see how I'd possibly push through it. The forest had closed behind me. I stood there fighting panic, trying to think rationally. I had my GPS. It showed my position clearly. I could navigate by compass if needed. I had supplies, water, emergency gear. Being off-trail in familiar forest wasn't a crisis. I just needed to stay calm and work the problem. I checked my GPS coordinates and started hiking perpendicular to where the trail had been, figuring I'd hit a forest road or another trail eventually. The Forest Service road system was extensive here, and I couldn't be more than a couple of miles from some kind of access route. I pushed through ferns and salal, navigating around fallen logs, maintaining my heading. The forest was quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own movement and breathing. That should have registered as wrong, should have been another warning. But I was focused on navigation, on getting out. I climbed a small rise to get perspective and looked out over the forest. What I saw made my blood run cold. From elevation, with a wider view, I could see the forest canopy stretching in every direction, unbroken, endless. But it wasn't normal forest. The canopy showed a pattern, a depression running through it like something had pressed down from above. The depression was circular, or nearly circular, and massive. From my vantage point, I could see it curving away in both directions, and I was standing inside it. The trail, my phone's GPS, everything had led me to the center of this massive circular depression in the forest. I pulled out my phone and checked the GPS again. According to it, I was standing in the middle of Lake Trillium. The map showed a large lake right at my coordinates, but there was no lake. I was standing on solid ground, surrounded by trees, in the middle of where a lake should be, but wasn't. I zoomed out on the map, looking at the larger area, and felt reality shift under my feet. The lake was 2 miles across according to the map. I'd been hiking for over 2 hours and should have covered 4 or 5 miles, putting me well past the lake. But somehow I was in the center of it, in a lake that didn't exist, or that existed on maps, but not in reality, or that existed in some way my senses couldn't perceive. I could feel the ground under my feet, solid and real. I could see trees and ferns and all the normal components of a Pacific Northwest forest. But according to every digital map system, every satellite image, every official record, I was standing in the middle of water. I started walking again, faster now, not caring about direction, just needing to move, needing to reach the edge of this impossible zone. If the lake was 2 miles across, I could hike to the shore, to where reality matched maps again, where the world made sense. I walked for what felt like an hour, maintaining a straight line by compass, crossing terrain that should have taken me to the lake's edge and beyond. My GPS continued to show me in the middle of the lake. The forest around me didn't change. Same trees, same understory, same endless repetition of ferns and fallen logs and moss-covered rocks. I should have reached the shore. I should have found the trail again, or a road, or some sign of the normal world. Instead, I just found more forest, identical to the forest I'd been walking through, stretching on without variation or end. That's when I noticed my footprints. I'd crossed a muddy section near a small stream, left clear boot prints in the soft earth. 20 minutes later, I crossed another muddy section and saw boot prints. My boot prints, same tread pattern, same size, same stride length. Fresh prints. Recent, like they'd been made minutes ago. I'd walked in a circle somehow, despite maintaining a straight line by compass. I checked the compass. It was spinning, not wildly, not obviously broken, just rotating slowly clockwise, the needle never settling on north, never pointing consistently in any direction. I pulled out my backup compass. Same thing. Slow rotation, no true north, useless for navigation. My phone's compass app showed the same behavior. Something in this area was affecting magnetic fields, making navigation impossible. I was trapped in a zone where maps showed water, where compasses didn't work, where the forest ate trails as you walked them, and where walking in straight lines brought you back to where you started. I sat down on a log and forced myself to breathe slowly, to think through options. Panic was the enemy. I had supplies for a couple days. I could stay put, wait for search and rescue if I didn't return when expected. But would they find me? Would they even look in the right place if all the maps said I should be underwater? I heard something then. A sound that didn't belong. Creaking like wood under stress, but rhythmic, regular. I stood up and turned slowly, trying to locate the source. The trees around me were moving, not swaying from wind. There was still no wind, but leaning. All of them. Every tree I could see was leaning inward toward where I stood. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely moving. The creaking was coming from their trunks, the sound of wood fibers stressing as the trees bent against their nature. They were all focused on me, all angling inward, and as I watched, they leaned further. The canopy above me was closing, trees from all directions bending until their branches touched, then intertwined, then wove together into a dome. I was being enclosed, trapped, under a living cage of wood and leaves. The light filtering through the canopy grew dimmer as the gaps closed. In minutes, maybe seconds, I'd be in complete darkness, buried under tons of living wood, alone in a forest that wasn't really a forest at all, but something else wearing a forest's shape. I didn't think, just moved on pure instinct. I ran in a random direction, sprinting through the undergrowth, ducking under branches that were descending toward me, feeling bark scrape across my back as the canopy tried to close before I could escape. The trees were moving faster now, no longer subtle or slow, but actively bending with purpose, their trunks creaking and groaning with the strain. I could hear wood splintering, could hear the crash of branches breaking as they forced themselves into angles trees weren't meant to achieve. Behind me, the dome was completing itself, sealing shut with a sound like a massive door slamming. I threw myself forward, literally diving the last few feet, and rolled clear just as the last gap closed. I looked back and saw nothing but a solid wall of interwoven trunks and branches, dense as a wooden fortress, with no indication of the space I'd just escaped from. I was gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might be sick, but I couldn't stop moving. The trees around me were starting to lean now, beginning the same slow inward bend I'd witnessed before. This wasn't a single event, wasn't one trap. The entire forest was doing this, creating enclosed spaces, cages of living wood, and I was the prey being herded from one to another. I ran again, no longer trying to navigate or maintain direction, just looking for spaces where the trees were still upright, where I had room to move. The forest had become a maze of closing passages, and I was a rat running through it, searching desperately for an exit that might not exist. My pack was slowing me down, so I shrugged it off, abandoned it where it fell, kept only my phone and water bottle. Speed was everything now. Getting trapped meant death, meant being crushed or suffocated, or simply held in wooden darkness until I died of thirst or starvation. I burst through a particularly dense thicket and stumbled into an opening, a place where the trees suddenly stopped. No gradual thinning, no natural transition, just a hard boundary where forest ended and open ground began. I stopped at the edge, breathing hard, and looked out at what should have been impossible. Water. A lake stretching out in front of me, maybe a quarter-mile across, perfectly circular, reflecting the sky and mirror-still surface. This was Lake Trillium, the real one, the one that existed on maps, the one I'd been standing in the center of, according to my GPS. But I hadn't been in water. I'd been in forest, which meant the lake and the forest occupied the same space somehow, existing in layers or dimensions that normally didn't touch, but were overlapping here, bleeding into each other in ways that broke every rule of physics I understood. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and checked the GPS. It showed me standing at the edge of Lake Trillium, exactly where I appeared to be. Finally, the map matched reality. I was at the shore. I could see the trail on the map, running along the lake's edge, continuing to a parking area maybe 2 miles away. If I followed the shore, stayed at this boundary between forest and water, I could navigate out. I started walking along the lake's edge, keeping the water on my left, the forest on my right. The trees at the forest edge were still, not leaning, not moving, as if they couldn't cross this boundary into the lake's space. I was safe as long as I stayed here, in this liminal zone where the layers met. The shore was rocky, difficult walking, but I didn't care. Every step was a step toward the parking area, toward my car, toward escape. I'd gone maybe half a mile when I noticed something in the water. Objects floating near the shore, partially submerged. I approached carefully, trying to make out what they were, and felt my stomach drop when I recognized the shape. A backpack. My backpack, the one I'd abandoned in the forest. It was waterlogged, half sunk, floating 20 feet from shore in water that should have been in a completely different location from where I'd dropped it. I looked further out and saw more objects. Pieces of gear, a sleeping bag, a tent still in its stuff sack, a water filter, energy bar wrappers. All the contents of my pack scattered across the lake's surface, even though I'd left the pack intact in the forest. The forest and the lake weren't just occupying the same space. They were the same place, two versions of the same location existing simultaneously. What I dropped in one appeared in the other. What happened in the forest affected the lake, and probably vice versa. I kept walking, faster now, unnerved by the floating gears and what it implied about the nature of this place. The shore curved gently, following the lake's circular perimeter, and I followed it religiously, never straying more than a few feet from the water's edge. The forest beside me remained still, but I could feel it watching, could sense attention focused on me from those trees. They wanted me to step back into the forest, back under the canopy where they could complete whatever they'd started. I wasn't going to give them the chance. The parking area was maybe a mile ahead now, according to my GPS. I could make it. I could get out of this nightmare place and back to civilization where forests stayed still and lakes didn't overlap with solid ground and maps actually represented reality. That's when I saw the figure ahead on the shore. Human-shaped, standing at the water's edge, motionless. I slowed my pace, cautious, trying to make out details. As I got closer, my chest tightened with a familiar dread. The figure was me. Exact same build, same clothing, same features. But this version was wrong somehow. The proportions slightly off, the way it stood too rigid, too still. It was facing the water, and as I approached, it turned its head to look at me. The movement was smooth, but somehow wrong, like watching a mannequin rotate on a turntable. Its face was my face, but empty, expressionless, eyes too dark and too vacant. It raised one arm and pointed at the water, the gesture mechanical and precise. I stopped walking, frozen by the impossibility of seeing myself standing there, by the wrongness of its movements and expression. "What are you?" I called out, my voice cracking. It didn't respond, just kept pointing at the water with that mechanical precision. I looked where it was pointing and saw something beneath the surface. A shape, large and dark, maybe 20 feet down, difficult to make out through the water's depth. It looked like a structure, angular and regular, definitely not natural. The longer I stared, the more details resolved. It was a building. A cabin or small house, perfectly preserved, sitting on the bottom of the lake like it had been built there intentionally. Furniture visible through windows, a chimney extending from the roof, a porch with rocking chairs still in place. An entire structure, underwater, impossible and wrong, and somehow more disturbing than everything else I'd experienced, because it was so clearly human-made, yet existing in a place humans couldn't survive. The figure beside me moved, that same wrong mechanical rotation, and now it was pointing into the forest. I followed its gesture and saw the same structure, the same cabin, sitting among the trees about 50 feet from the shore, perfectly intact, not underwater at all, but surrounded by ferns and moss and forest growth. Same building, existing in both places simultaneously, both underwater and on dry land, both in the lake version of this location and the forest version. I looked back at the water, and the cabin beneath the surface was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. Maybe I'd only seen it because the figure made me look. When I turned back to the shore, the figure was gone too. No sign it had ever been there except for footprints in the mud, my footprints leading from the water's edge back into the forest. I needed to keep moving, but I was paralyzed by the wrongness of everything, by the cascade of impossibilities piling up until I couldn't process them anymore. How could a building exist in two states simultaneously? How could I leave footprints in places I'd never walked? What was the figure that wore my shape, and where had it come from? My phone rang, the sound so jarringly normal that I actually jumped. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I answered because anything human, any connection to the normal world, felt like a lifeline. "Hello?" My own voice answered. "Stop walking along the shore. Enter the cabin. Enter the forest. Enter the water. They're all the same place. You need to choose one, or you'll be stuck in the boundary forever." The call ended before I could respond, leaving me standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to dead air. I looked at my call history. The incoming call showed my own number. I just received a call from myself, from my own phone, which was in my hand. I dialed my voicemail, hands shaking. One new message. Timestamp showing it had been left 3 hours ago, before I'd even arrived at the trailhead. I played it. My own voice, but wrong somehow. Distorted like it was coming from underwater or through layers of wood. "You're going to get lost. You're going to find the place where the forest and the lake overlap. When you do, don't try to walk the boundary. The boundary isn't real. Choose forest or choose water, but don't stay between them. The between is where you'll die." The message ended. I'd left myself a warning before the events it was warning about, which meant I'd somehow already experienced this, already gotten trapped, already died here, and was trying to warn a past version of myself to make different choices. I looked at the forest, at the cabin sitting among the trees. I looked at the water, at where the cabin had been visible beneath the surface. I looked at the shore I was walking on, the boundary between the two. According to the message I'd left myself, staying here was death. But both other options seemed equally impossible. How do you enter a forest that creates wooden cages? How do you enter water that overlaps with solid ground? I pulled out my phone and checked my photos, looking for any other clues I might have left myself. The most recent photo stopped me cold. It showed me, taken from behind, walking along this exact stretch of shore. But I hadn't taken this photo. I'd been alone since the couple I'd passed hours ago. Someone or something had been following me, documenting me, using my own phone to do it. I scrolled back further and found more. Dozens of photos I didn't remember taking. Me climbing the initial trail. Me pushing through the undergrowth as the trail degraded. Me standing in the center of the circular depression, looking confused. Me running from the closing canopy. All taken from angles that showed I was being observed, recorded, tracked through my entire journey. The most disturbing photo was the last one in the sequence. It showed me standing exactly where I was standing now, looking at my phone, seeing these photos. It had been taken seconds ago, from maybe 30 feet away in the forest. I spun around, searching the tree line, and saw the figure again. Not the mechanical version that had pointed at the water, but another one. This one holding up a phone, taking another photo of me. I could hear the fake shutter sound from here, could see the screen light up with each shot. It was documenting me in real time, adding to the collection of images showing my path through this place. And now I could see there were more figures, more versions of me, scattered through the trees at the forest edge. Some were still, some were moving in that wrong mechanical way, all of them watching me, all of them existing in this space where I apparently didn't belong or hadn't chosen correctly. What do you want? I screamed at them, at the forest, at the lake, at the entire impossible situation. My voice echoed strangely, seeming to come from multiple directions, bouncing between forest and water in ways that defied normal acoustics. The figures didn't respond, but they moved, all of them simultaneously, taking a single step forward, toward me, toward the shore. They were crossing the boundary from forest to the liminal space I occupied, and their movement looked painful, wrong, like they were forcing themselves through a membrane that resisted them. One reached the edge of the water and touched it with a foot. Where the foot entered, the water didn't splash or ripple. It just accepted the intrusion, the foot sinking in like the water was solid or like the foot wasn't really physical anymore. I understood then, in a flash of horrible clarity. The figures were previous versions of me. Every time I'd gotten lost here, every iteration that had died in the forest or the lake or on the boundary between them had left an imprint. These were the ghosts or echoes or whatever remained of me after each death, and they were trying to show me that all the choices led to the same place. Forest meant being trapped in wooden cages. Water meant drowning or sinking or being erased. The boundary meant existing in liminal space until I faded into one of these mechanical wrong things that could barely interact with physical reality. There was no good choice. Every option was death, just different flavors of it. But I wasn't ready to give up. I started running along the shore again, ignoring the figures, ignoring the cabin, ignoring everything except the GPS coordinates that showed the parking area getting closer. Half a mile now. Just half a mile to the trailhead, to my car, to escape. The figures kept pace with me, moving through the trees parallel to my path, that stop-motion jerky movement covering ground impossibly fast. More of them were appearing, dozens now, all wearing my face, all watching me run. The lake beside me started to change. The surface was no longer still but rippling, like something large was moving beneath it, disturbing the water from below. I could see shapes now, dark, massive shapes circling under the surface, and I realized with mounting horror that these were the versions of me that had chosen water. They hadn't drowned. They'd become something else, something adapted to living underwater, something large and wrong that existed in the lake layer of this overlapped space. The shore ahead was changing too. The boundary between forest and water was becoming less distinct, the two spaces bleeding into each other more aggressively. Trees were growing from the lake, their roots underwater, but their trunks extending into air. Water was pooling among the forest trees, creating tide pools and streams that shouldn't exist on dry land. The layering was breaking down, the separation failing, and I was going to be caught in the collapse when the two spaces merged completely. I could see the parking area ahead now, maybe a quarter mile, so close. But the shore wasn't continuous anymore. It was fragmenting, sections of it existing sometimes as land, sometimes as water, flickering between states. I'd have to cross through spaces where reality wasn't stable, where I might be stepping on solid ground or into deep water depending on which version of the location was dominant at that exact moment. I didn't have a choice. I ran forward, watching my footing, trying to time my steps to land on spaces that looked solid. Sometimes I guessed right and felt rock or dirt under my boots. Sometimes I guessed wrong and plunged knee-deep into water that appeared from nowhere, soaking my legs, slowing me down. The figures were closer now, some of them on the shore with me, moving through the same flickering spaces, existing in both forest and water simultaneously because they weren't fully real anymore, weren't constrained by having to choose one state or the other. They were showing me my future, what I'd become if I stayed here long enough. Not dead exactly, but not alive either. Just echoes wearing human shape, trapped forever in a place that couldn't decide if it was solid or liquid, real or impossible. The parking area was ahead. I could see the small gravel lot, could see vehicles including mine. But between me and it was a section where the flickering was worst, where forest and water were alternating so rapidly, it created a strobing effect that hurt to look at. I couldn't tell what was real, couldn't predict what each step would land on. I took a breath and ran anyway, committing fully, sprinting across the unstable ground. My left foot hit water, my right foot hit stone, left foot hit nothing, and I fell, catching myself on hands that plunged into both mud and water simultaneously. I pushed up and kept going, crawling when I couldn't run, dragging myself toward the parking area that stayed solid, stayed in the forest version of this space, real and normal and achievable, if I could just cover the last 100 feet. Something grabbed my ankle, a hand, cold and wet, pulling me back toward the water. I looked down and saw one of the underwater versions of me, one of the large, dark shapes, partially emerged from the lake. It had my face but elongated, adapted for swimming, eyes too large and mouth too wide, skin pale and translucent. It was trying to pull me into the water, trying to make me choose its fate, trying to add me to its school of transformed bodies. I kicked, connected with its face, felt bones give way, but it didn't let go, just pulled harder. Another hand grabbed my other ankle, then another grabbed my arm. Multiple versions of me, all trying to claim me for their version of existence. Forest versions, grabbing from one side, water versions from the other, boundary versions just standing there, watching with empty expressions. I screamed and thrashed and fought, pure survival instinct overriding rational thought. My hand closed on a rock and I swung it, smashing it into the nearest face, the nearest hand, not caring that I was hitting versions of myself. They weren't me anymore. They were what happened when you stayed too long in impossible places, when you got caught between states of being and lost the ability to exist fully in any of them. I broke free through sheer, desperate violence, leaving skin on their hands, leaving blood on the rocks. But I was moving again, crawling and then running, covering the last distance to the parking area on pure adrenaline and terror. My feet hit solid ground that didn't flicker, didn't alternate, didn't threaten to become water or void or anything except normal earth. I was in the parking area. I could see my car. I fumbled for my keys, got the door open, threw myself inside, and locked the doors like that would help. The figures were at the edge of the parking area, dozens of them, all standing in a line at the boundary between the trailhead and the impossible space I'd just escaped. They were watching me, but not crossing. Like they couldn't enter this normal space. Like they were confined to the zone where forest and water overlapped. I started the car with shaking hands and drove, not looking back, not stopping until I was miles away, back on highways, surrounded by traffic and buildings and all the mundane normal things that proved I was back in the real world. I tried to report what happened, talk to rangers, to police, to anyone who would listen. They were polite but dismissive, checked maps that showed Lake Trillium exactly where it had always been, sent teams to verify the trail was in good condition, found no evidence of any structural damage to the forest, no wooden cages, no collapsed canopies, told me I'd probably gotten dehydrated and disoriented, maybe experienced some altitude-related confusion. I stopped arguing because I could see in their eyes they thought I was unstable, possibly dangerous. But I know what I experienced. I know that place exists. That space where forest and water occupy the same coordinates, where versions of you get trapped and transformed into things that exist between states of being. I still get calls from my own number sometimes, messages that contain warnings about places I haven't been yet, advice about choices I haven't made. I've stopped answering them. And I see myself sometimes in reflections that last too long, in photographs where the background shows figures I didn't notice when the picture was taken. They're still there, all the versions of me that didn't make it out. And they're watching, waiting, calling me back to that place where they exist. I've moved 3 times trying to escape them. But distance doesn't matter. They're not following me through physical space. They exist in the same overlapped coordinates I do, just in different layers of reality. They're under me, over me, around me, always just slightly out of phase with normal existence. And someday I know one of them will figure out how to cross fully into this layer. One of them will stop being an echo and become solid. And when that happens, I don't know which version of me will be real anymore. Which one will get to keep existing in normal space? And which one will get pulled back to that shore, to walk the boundary forever between forest and water, solid and liquid, alive and something else entirely. The Alpine Lakes wilderness was supposed to be the perfect place for a solo backpacking trip. I'd planned 3 days above tree line, crossing a chain of pristine glacial lakes at 7,000 feet, nothing but rock and sky and crystal clear water. The forecast was perfect, my gear was dialed in, and I'd done enough preparation that the route felt almost casual. I started the hike at dawn, watching the sun break over the Cascades as I climbed steadily toward the alpine zone. By noon, I'd left the trees behind and was traversing open terrain, massive granite slabs and patches of old snow, the landscape reduced to essential elements. Rock, water, sky, nothing else. It was exactly the simplicity I'd been craving after months of complicated city life and work stress that never seemed to end. Up here, problems became manageable. Perspective returned. I could breathe. The first lake was perfect, exactly as the photos had shown. Mirror still surface reflecting the peaks around it, so clear I could see rocks on the bottom even in the deeper sections. I stopped for lunch on the shore, dangling my feet in water so cold it made my bones ache, watching small fish dart between submerged boulders. The surface was so still that when I moved, my reflection moved with perfect synchronization. Except it didn't. I noticed it while taking a drink from my water bottle. My reflection lifted its hand to drink about a second before I did. I paused, watching more carefully. I raised my left hand slowly. My reflection raised its left hand, but the movement started before mine, leading by maybe half a second. I told myself it was a trick of light, refraction doing something weird, my tired brain interpreting timing incorrectly. I finished lunch and kept hiking, following the trail that connected the chain of lakes. The second lake sat in a bowl of granite maybe a mile from the first, accessed by scrambling over a low ridge. The water here was even clearer, even more still. I stopped to refill my water bottles and caught sight of my reflection again. This time the lead was more obvious. My reflection's movements preceded mine by a full second, maybe more. I'd think about adjusting my pack strap and see my reflection reach for it before I did. I'd start to crouch down and see my reflection already crouching. It was showing me actions I was about to take. Movements I hadn't consciously decided on yet. Like it was reading my intentions directly and acting them out ahead of schedule. I knelt at the water's edge and stared at my reflection, trying to understand what I was seeing. The face looking back was mine, same features, same expression. But the eyes seemed more aware somehow, more focused, like it was studying me as intently as I was studying it. I decided to test it. I stayed completely still, not moving, barely breathing, and watched my reflection. For maybe 10 seconds, nothing happened. We both held position, mirror images frozen in identical poses. Then my reflection moved. It turned its head slightly, looked to the left, then back at me. It smiled. Not a big smile, just a slight upturn of lips. But I hadn't smiled. I hadn't moved at all. My reflection was acting independently, doing things I wasn't doing, and that should have been impossible. Reflections don't have autonomy. They're optical phenomena, light bouncing off surfaces, nothing more. But this reflection had just smiled at me, while I kept my face neutral. And now it was raising its right hand in what looked like a wave. A greeting, or maybe a goodbye. I stumbled backward from the water's edge, my heart racing. And when I looked back, my reflection was mimicking my movements again, matching my scared retreat with perfect synchronization, like nothing strange had happened at all. I told myself to leave, to turn around and hike back down to tree line, back to the normal world where reflections behaved predictably. But I'd come so far, and the next lake was supposed to be the most beautiful, the crown jewel of the chain. I could skip it, avoid the water, just hike past without stopping to look. I could complete the loop without engaging with whatever was happening in these alpine lakes. That seemed reasonable. That seemed safe. I continued hiking, contouring around the second lake, climbing over talus fields toward the third and largest lake in the chain. The sun was lower now, afternoon sliding toward evening, and I needed to find a campsite soon. The plan had been to camp near the third lake, but now that seemed like a terrible idea. Better to push on, get past it, camp somewhere without standing water where reflections couldn't form. I crested a rise and saw the third lake spread out below me, maybe a quarter mile across, surrounded by sheer granite walls on 3 sides. The 4th side, where I stood, sloped down gradually to the shore. The water was the deepest blue I'd ever seen. That perfect alpine lake color that comes from glacial melt and mineral content and depth, measured in hundreds of feet. It was stunning. Objectively, one of the most beautiful sights I'd ever witnessed. And I was terrified of it. I could see my reflection from here, a tiny figure standing on the ridge. And even from this distance, I could tell it was moving wrong. While I stood still, scanning the terrain, my reflection was gesturing, waving its arms, moving in ways I wasn't moving. It was trying to get my attention, or trying to communicate something, and it had given up pretending to match my movements. It was doing its own thing now, acting as a separate entity that happened to wear my shape. I started descending toward the lake, not because I wanted to, but because the trail went that way, and I needed to follow it to complete the loop. There were no alternate routes at this elevation. I had to pass the lake to continue. As I got closer, I could see my reflection more clearly, and my stomach knotted with dread. It wasn't just moving independently anymore. It was doing things I hadn't done yet. I watched it walk down to the shore while I was still 50 feet up the slope. I watched it kneel by the water while I was still standing. I watched it reach into the water, arms submerged to the shoulder, fishing for something in the depths. I hadn't done any of those things, wasn't planning to do any of those things. But my reflection was acting them out anyway, showing me a sequence of events that hadn't happened yet, or showing me what I was supposed to do, or maybe showing me what had happened in some other version of events that I couldn't perceive. I reached the shore, and my reflection looked up at me from its kneeling position in the water. Its arm was still submerged, still reaching for something deep below the surface. It mouthed words I couldn't hear, speaking to me across the barrier of water and air and whatever else separated reflections from their sources. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but the expression on its face was urgent, desperate almost, like it was trying to warn me about something critically important. Then it pulled its arm from the water, and it was holding something. An object, dark and dripping, about the size of a backpack. My backpack. The same pack currently on my shoulders. But this version was soaked, waterlogged, pulled from the bottom of the lake like it had been submerged for days or weeks. I looked down at the water where my reflection knelt and saw it. My backpack, 20 feet down, resting on a ledge of submerged rock. The water was so clear I could see every detail. The same wear patterns, the same patches I'd sewn on, the same zipper pulls I'd added for easy access. My pack was at the bottom of the lake, even though it was on my back. Both versions existed simultaneously, one dry and in use, one waterlogged and abandoned. I looked at my reflection again, and it was pointing now, gesturing deeper into the lake, directing my attention to something further out. I followed its gesture and saw more objects on the lake bottom. A sleeping bag still in its stuff sack, a tent, cooking gear, all my equipment scattered across the bottom, arranged like I'd set up camp down there and then left everything behind. Then I saw the body. It was maybe 40 feet out, 30 feet down, resting against a boulder on the lake floor. Face down, arms spread, wearing clothes identical to what I was wearing. Same jacket, same pants, same boots. I couldn't see the face from this angle, but I knew what I'd see if I could, my face. That was me down there, drowned or dead from some other cause. Body preserved in the cold water, equipment scattered around the site of whatever had killed me. I was looking at my own corpse at the bottom of an alpine lake. which was impossible because I was alive, standing here, very much not drowned. But the body was real. I could see it clearly through the impossibly clear water, could see my jacket moving slightly in subtle currents, could see my hair drifting in the water like seaweed. I stepped back from the water's edge, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. My reflection stood up in the water, still holding the waterlogged pack, and now it was gesturing more frantically, pointing at the body, then at me, then back at the body. It was trying to tell me something about the corpse, about what had happened or what was going to happen. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, thinking I'd document this, take photos, have evidence. But when I looked at the screen, my photo library was already full of images I didn't remember taking. Pictures of this lake from angles I hadn't been to yet. Pictures of my campsite set up on the shore. Pictures of me sleeping in my tent. Pictures of me walking into the water, wading deeper and deeper until the water reached my waist, my chest, my neck. The final photo showed just the surface of the lake, with ripples spreading from a central point where something had just gone under. The timestamps on the photos were wrong. They showed times that hadn't happened yet, dates from tonight and tomorrow morning. I was looking at documentation of my own death, photos taken by my own phone, showing the sequence of events that would lead to me becoming the body at the bottom of the lake. I looked at my reflection and it nodded, confirming what I was seeing. This was my future. This was what happened if I stayed here. If I camped by this lake like I'd planned. Somehow I would end up walking into the water and not coming back out. The reflection wasn't just showing me movements ahead of time. It was showing me the future, acting out events that hadn't occurred yet, but would, inevitably, if I didn't change something. I turned to leave, to hike away from the lake immediately, to get as far from this cursed place as possible before the future in those photos could become real. But my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, not from fear, but from something else, some external force holding me in place. I looked down and saw water pooling around my boots, even though I was standing several feet from the shore. The lake was expanding, or I was sinking, or the boundary between water and land was shifting. The pooled water rose quickly, covering my boots, reaching my ankles, cold seeping through the fabric. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't lift. I was stuck, held in place while the water rose around me. My reflection was wading toward shore now, moving through the water with purpose, getting closer to the boundary between the lake and the land where I stood. As it approached, I could see differences I hadn't noticed before. Its features were sharper than mine, more defined, like it was a perfected version of me, or maybe a more real version. Its eyes were clearer, more focused, and they held knowledge I didn't have, understanding of things I couldn't grasp. When it reached the shore, it didn't stop at the water's edge. It kept coming, stepping up onto land, crossing the boundary that should have been impossible to cross. Reflections don't leave their surfaces. They don't become physical. But this one was walking toward me, water dripping from its clothes, my waterlogged backpack still clutched in its hands. It stopped 3 feet away, and we stared at each other, source and reflection face to face. And I could see now that it wasn't exactly my reflection anymore. It was something else wearing my appearance, something that had learned my shape from observing me in the water. When it spoke, the voice was mine, but the cadence was wrong, the rhythm slightly off. "You were supposed to come into the water," it said. 3 hours from now, you were supposed to wade in and not come back out. I was supposed to replace you, walk back down the mountain wearing your shape, live your life while you stayed here in the lake. But you saw me too early. You noticed the timing was wrong. That wasn't supposed to happen. I tried to respond, but my voice caught. Fear and confusion choking off words. The water around my legs was up to my knees now, still rising, still holding me in place. The reflection tilted its head, studying me with those two clear eyes. Every lake in this chain holds one of us, it said. We wait in the water, watching hikers through their reflections, learning them, mimicking them, waiting for the right moment to switch places. Most people never notice. They see their reflection moving normally, and they don't think about split-second delays or movements that come too early. But you noticed. You paid attention. That makes this complicated. It stepped closer, and I could smell the lake water on it. Minerals and cold and something else. Something that didn't belong in mountain lakes. I can't let you leave now, it continued. You know too much. You've seen the body, seen the photos, figured out what we do. If you leave, you'll tell people. Rangers will come, divers will search, and they'll find the bodies. All the bodies. Dozens of them at the bottom of every lake in this range. All the people we replaced over the years. We can't let that happen. It reached out with one hand, fingers dripping lake water, and touched my chest. Where it touched, cold spread like ice forming in my veins. You have two choices. Go into the water willingly. Let me take your place, and your death will be quick. Or fight, and I'll drag you down slowly, and you'll be conscious the whole time, feeling the water fill your lungs, feeling yourself become one of the bodies at the bottom. I found my voice finally, forcing words through the cold that was spreading from its touch. What are you? What are all of you? It smiled, and the expression was almost sad. We're what happens when mountains make lakes that are too perfect, too still, too clear. We're what grows in water that reflects too well, that holds images too precisely. We're reflections that became real, that learned to want the world above the surface, that figured out how to take it from people who came too close. We're not alive, not dead, just something in between that exists in perfect water and needs bodies to wear if we want to leave it. The water was at my waist now, and I could feel my body temperature dropping, hypothermia beginning its slow creep. I looked past the reflection thing to the lake and saw more of them emerging. Dozens of figures wading toward shore, all wearing the faces of hikers who'd come before me, all dripping with lake water, all moving with that slightly wrong cadence that marked them as something other than human. They'd all been waiting, all watching through their respective lakes. And now they were coming to witness this, to see if I'd surrender or fight, to help their companion drag me under if necessary. I made my choice. I stopped fighting the water holding my legs, stopped trying to pull away from the cold spreading from the reflection's touch. And instead, I fell forward, directly into it, knocking us both into the water, tangling my arms around its torso, dragging it down with me as we hit the surface. The cold was absolute, shocking, driving the air from my lungs in an explosive gasp that filled my mouth with glacial water. But I held on, wrapping myself around the reflection thing, feeling it struggle and writhe in my grip. We sank quickly, the weight of two bodies and my waterlogged pack pulling us down. I'd realized something in those final seconds before I acted. The reflection had crossed onto land, had left the water to speak to me, to threaten me. It had broken the rules it claimed to follow, had existed outside the lake, which meant it was vulnerable outside its element, which meant I might be able to hurt it. And if I was going to die here anyway, if I was going to become another body at the bottom feeding these things, I was going to take at least one of them with me. We struggled as we sank, tumbling in the clear water, and I could feel its body changing in my grip. It was losing cohesion, becoming less solid, the form it had stolen from me dissolving back into water and something else. Something dark and fluid that spread around us like ink. My lungs were burning, screaming for air, but I didn't let go. We hit the bottom 30 feet down, and I could see the other body nearby, the one I'd seen from the surface. The version of me that had already drowned, or would drown in some timeline this place operated by. The reflection thing was barely humanoid now. Just a vaguely person-shaped mass of dark water trying to pull free from my grip. I planted my feet on the lake bottom and pushed, driving both of us toward a crevice in the rock, a narrow crack that split the granite. I forced the thing into the crack, wedged it in tight, then grabbed the largest rock I could lift and jammed it into the opening, trapping the dark mass inside. My vision was tunneling, black closing in from the edges, my body shutting down from cold and oxygen deprivation. But I saw the dark mass pulse once, twice, then go still. Trapped. Maybe destroyed, maybe just contained. But either way, it wasn't going to replace me, wasn't going to walk off this mountain wearing my face. I looked up at the surface, impossibly far above, and saw the other reflection things staring down at me. They weren't coming to help their companion. They were just watching, waiting to see if I'd die here, waiting to claim another body for their collection. I pushed off the bottom with the last strength I had, kicking toward the surface, knowing I wouldn't make it, knowing I'd used too much energy in the fight, spent too much time underwater. But I kicked anyway, one stroke after another, pulling myself up through clear blue water while my lungs screamed and my vision narrowed to a pinpoint. The surface got closer, but never close enough. My movements became weaker, less coordinated. I stopped rising and started sinking again, my body giving up, going limp. This was it. This was how I joined the bodies at the bottom. I'd fought, but it wasn't enough. I was going to die in an alpine lake, become another corpse for the reflection things to show to future hikers, another warning that no one would understand until too late. Then something grabbed me, hands under my arms, lifting, pulling me upward with strength I didn't have. I couldn't turn my head to see what had me, couldn't process anything except the desperate need for air. We broke the surface, and I gasped, choking, coughing up lake water, sucking in air in great, ragged gulps that hurt like breathing glass. The hands dragged me toward shore, hauled me onto rocks, turned me on my side so I could vomit out the water I'd swallowed. I lay there shaking violently, hypothermia and shock setting in, barely conscious. Someone was wrapping me in something warm. A sleeping bag, maybe? Rubbing my arms and legs to restore circulation. When I could finally focus, I looked up at my rescuer. It was another hiker, an older man with a weather-beaten face and concerned eyes. "Saw you go in," he said. "Thought you were just waiting, but then you went under and didn't come back up. Got to you just in time." I tried to tell him about the reflection things, about what lived in these lakes. But my teeth were chattering too hard to form words. He built a fire somehow, found dry wood in this alpine zone, got it burning, and moved me close to the heat. As warmth slowly returned to my body, I looked at the lake and saw them. The reflection things, still there at the water's edge, watching us. But they weren't approaching. They weren't leaving the water. The presence of another person, a witness, seemed to keep them contained. The hikers stayed with me through the night, keeping the fire going, monitoring me for signs of severe hypothermia. By morning, I could move again, could think clearly enough to know I needed to get off this mountain immediately. We hiked out together, the older man supporting me when my legs got shaky, making sure I made it back to the trailhead. I tried to thank him, tried to get his name so I could repay him somehow. But he just smiled and said, "Helping people was what you did in the mountains." He watched me drive away, and I saw him turn back toward the trailhead like he was going to hike up again. I reported everything to the rangers, insisted they search the lakes, bring divers, find the bodies. They were polite, but skeptical. They checked their records and told me the older hiker I described, the one who saved me, matched the description of someone who'd gone missing in that area 15 years ago. Never found, presumed dead in the winter. They sent a team up eventually, more to humor me than because they believed my story. They found nothing. No bodies, no submerged gear, no evidence anyone had ever drowned in those lakes. The water was too clear, they said. They could see all the way to the bottom. Nothing there but rocks and fish. But I know what I saw. I know what lives in alpine lakes that are too perfect, too still, too clear. And I know that hiker who saved me wasn't alive, wasn't human anymore, was something else wearing the shape of someone who died in those mountains years ago. Maybe he was fighting the reflection things, trying to save others from the fate he'd suffered. Or maybe he was one of them, playing a different game, saving me for reasons I don't understand. I don't know. I just know I'll never hike near alpine lakes again, never camp where still water can form reflections, never trust my own image looking back at me from a surface too perfect to be natural. And sometimes, when I look in mirrors or windows or any reflective surface, I see my movements come a split second early. Like something else has learned my patterns, like something that wears my face is trying to figure out the right moment to switch places and finish what almost happened on that mountain. I'd been injured for 3 hours when I saw the search and rescue team appear on the ridge above me. The relief that flooded through me was so intense, I almost started crying. I'd fallen while scrambling across loose talus in the North Cascades backcountry, tumbled maybe 15 feet down into a ravine, and done something bad to my ankle. It was swollen, possibly broken, definitely unable to bear weight. I'd managed to drag myself into a more sheltered position and activate my emergency beacon, but I'd been preparing myself for a long, cold wait. SAR teams usually took hours to mobilize and reach remote locations, but here they were, less than 3 hours after my fall, already on scene. 5 people in matching orange gear with professional packs and rescue equipment, moving with practiced efficiency down the steep terrain toward my position. The leader reached me first, a tall man with a kind face and salt and pepper beard visible under his helmet. "We got your signal," he said, kneeling beside me. "Let's take a look at that ankle." His hands were gentle as he examined my injury, his movements confident and practiced. The other 4 team members set up around us, one pulling out medical supplies, another checking my vital signs, the third and fourth assessing the terrain and discussing extraction options. Everything felt professional, organized, exactly what I'd expect from an experienced SR team. They gave me water, wrapped me in a thermal blanket, splinted my ankle with expert precision. "We'll have you out of here in no time," the leader said, and I believed him completely. They got me on a litter, strapped me in securely, and started carrying me out. The route they chose was smart, avoiding the worst of the steep terrain, finding paths I hadn't noticed. They moved fast, incredibly fast for the difficulty of the terrain, barely seeming to strain under my weight. I should have been grateful, should have been nothing but relieved. But something was nagging at me. something felt slightly wrong in a way I couldn't identify. They weren't talking much, which made sense given the physical effort they were expending. But the silence felt unnatural. No small talk, no questions about how I'd gotten injured, no discussion of the route. Just focused, efficient movement through increasingly difficult terrain. After maybe an hour, I realized what was bothering me. The light. When they'd arrived, it had been late afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock based on the sun's position. Now it should be closer to 5, maybe 5:30 given how long we'd been traveling. But it was darker than that. Much darker. The sun had dropped below the horizon and dusk was settling in, which meant it was past 7, possibly past 8. We'd been traveling for 3 or 4 hours, not 1. Time had skipped forward somehow, or I'd lost consciousness without realizing it, or something else was wrong with my perception. I looked at the team members carrying me and tried to see their faces more clearly in the failing light. The leader at the front of the litter, guiding us through the terrain. 2 on the sides, maintaining balance. 2 more behind. 5 people total, same as when they'd arrived. Except, I couldn't remember what any of their faces looked like. I'd seen the leader clearly when he first reached me, remembered his kind expression and salt and pepper beard. But now, when I tried to recall his features, they slipped away from memory, like water through fingers. I couldn't picture any of their faces with precision, couldn't remember specific details beyond vague impressions. And looking at them now, in the dimming light, their faces seemed oddly indistinct, like they were slightly out of focus, even though everything else was sharp. I told myself it was the light, the angle, my pain and stress affecting my perception. But the nagging feeling was growing stronger, crystallizing into something closer to fear. How much farther? I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. The leader didn't turn around, just said, "Not far now. We'll have you safe soon." The voice was reassuring, perfectly calibrated to be comforting. But it sounded the same as before. Exactly the same. The exact same cadence, the exact same tone, like he was repeating a phrase he'd practiced rather than responding naturally to my question. I looked at the others, tried to catch their eyes, get some acknowledgement or reassurance. But none of them looked at me. They just kept moving forward with that same efficient, focused movement, carrying me deeper into the forest. The terrain was wrong too. We should have been climbing out of the ravine, working our way back up to the main trail system. But we were going down, descending into thicker forest, darker shadows, areas I hadn't seen on my approach hike. "Are we going the right way?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This doesn't look familiar." Again, the leader responded without turning. "We know the route. Trust us. We'll have you safe soon." Same tone, same cadence, almost robotic in its consistency. I tried to sit up, to look around more clearly, but the straps on the litter held me firmly in place. I was secured, immobilized, completely dependent on these 5 people carrying me into increasingly unfamiliar terrain. That's when I noticed their shadows. The last light of dusk was creating long shadows across the forest floor, and the team members should have been casting them. But they weren't. The litter I was strapped to had a shadow. The trees around us had shadows. But the 5 people carrying me cast nothing. They moved through the fading light without creating any darkness of their own, like they weren't quite solid, like they weren't entirely present in physical space. I stared at where their shadows should be, trying to find some rational explanation. But there wasn't one. Things that don't cast shadows aren't real, aren't physical, aren't what they appear to be. "Stop," I said, more forcefully now. "Put me down. I want to rest." They didn't stop. They didn't even slow down. "We're almost there," the leader said, same voice, same reassurance. "Just a little farther." I started struggling against the straps, trying to free myself, fear overriding the pain in my ankle. "Let me go. Put me down." My voice was getting higher, panic bleeding through. They didn't react, didn't acknowledge my distress, just kept carrying me forward through the darkening forest. I could barely see now, the last light fading fast, and I realized with horror that they weren't using headlamps. They were navigating in near darkness, without lights, without any difficulty, seeing through shadow like it was daylight. I screamed then, full volume, hoping someone real might hear, might come to investigate. The sound echoed through the forest, but the team didn't flinch, didn't react at all. They just kept moving with that same mechanical efficiency, carrying me deeper and deeper into terrain I didn't recognize. The trees were different here, older, more twisted, their branches reaching overhead in patterns that looked deliberately arranged rather than naturally grown. I could see through gaps in the canopy that the sky was wrong too. Not the normal deep blue of twilight, but something darker. Something that held no stars, no moon, just empty blackness that went on forever. We entered a clearing, and they finally stopped. Set the litter down gently, professionally, then stepped back in perfect unison. 5 figures standing in a circle around me, their faces completely invisible now in the darkness. Just vague human-shaped shadows with no detail, no features. The leader spoke again, but his voice had changed. No longer reassuring, no longer human. Something else speaking through a human-shaped mask, letting the pretense drop now that I was where they wanted me. "You called for rescue," it said. We answered. But rescue means different things to different entities. You wanted to be carried away from pain. We're carrying you away, to a place where pain doesn't exist, where nothing exists, where the forest takes what it's called to take and keeps it forever. The other 4 spoke in unison, their voices layered, harmonizing in ways human voices shouldn't be able to harmonize. "We are what comes when you call into the wilderness. We are what answers beacons and signals and cries for help. We wear the shapes you expect, speak the words you need to hear, and we take you where you asked to go. Away from where you were, into somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere you'll never leave." They started moving closer, closing the circle, and I could see now that they weren't human-shaped anymore. The pretense was dropping completely, revealing what had been wearing rescue team shapes. They were tall, too tall, their proportions wrong, their movements fluid in ways that suggested no skeletal structure. They were darkness wearing human-sized containers, mimicking rescue, personnel well enough to fool someone desperate and hurt and hoping for salvation. I tried to roll off the litter, but the straps held firm. Restraints that had seemed protective, now revealing their true purpose. I was secured, delivered, presented to whatever these things were. They reached down with appendages that looked like hands in the darkness, but felt wrong, too cold, too fluid, touching me with pressure that seemed to pass through clothing and skin, reaching for something deeper inside. My vision was blurring, consciousness fading, and the last thing I heard was that layered voice saying, "Everyone who calls for rescue in the deep places gets an answer. But sometimes the answer isn't human. Sometimes it's us. And we always complete our mission. We always bring you to safety, our kind of safety, the kind that exists in spaces between, in forests that exist slightly off from reality, in places the maps don't show but the wilderness knows. Welcome home. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. Rangers had found me near the trail, unconscious, severely hypothermic, my ankle badly injured but splinted with professional precision. They said I'd been incredibly lucky, that someone with medical training must have helped me before I collapsed, probably saved my life. They searched for the SAR team I described, but found no records of any team being deployed to my location. My emergency beacon had been activated, they confirmed, but no official response had been dispatched yet. They were still mobilizing when hikers stumbled across me by accident. I tried to explain about the team that carried me, about where they'd taken me. But the Rangers exchanged concerned looks and suggested the hypothermia had caused hallucinations, confusion, false memories of rescue that never happened. But I know what I experienced. I know I was carried for hours into impossible forest by things pretending to be human, pretending to be help. And I know I shouldn't have survived, shouldn't have been found near the trail, should have disappeared into whatever space they were taking me to. Something intervened. Something stopped the process before it completed, sent me back, left me where real humans could find me. I don't know what or why. Maybe the wilderness itself has rules, even those things have to follow. Maybe my beacon really did summon real help somehow. And 2 teams arrived, one real and one not. And they competed for me in ways I don't understand. I don't know. What I know is that I'll never activate another emergency beacon in the wilderness. I'll never call for rescue again. Because if you call in the deep places, something will answer, and it might wear the right shapes and speak the right words, but you won't know what it really is until it's too late. Until you're strapped down and being carried away into forests that don't exist on any map, taken to safety that means something very different from what you hoped for when you called. I'd been documenting elk migration patterns in Siosla National Forest for 3 weeks, setting up trail cameras on remote paths where the herds pass through on their seasonal routes. It was solo work, which I preferred. Just me in the forest and equipment that required careful placement and regular maintenance. I'd check each camera every few days, swap out memory cards, replace batteries, adjust angles based on what the previous footage showed. It was methodical, peaceful work that kept me in the wilderness for extended periods. On this particular trip, I was retrieving a camera I'd placed 2 weeks earlier on a trail I'd never hiked before. An unmarked path that deer trails suggested saw regular animal traffic. The camera was right where I'd left it, securely mounted to a tree with a clear view of the path. I pulled the memory card and replaced it with a fresh one, then sat down to review the footage on my laptop right there in the forest, making sure I'd captured useful data before hiking the 3 miles back to my truck. The first few days of footage were exactly what I'd expected. Elk passing in small groups, deer browsing, a black bear ambling through one evening. Standard Pacific Northwest wildlife doing standard things. Then, on day 4 of recording, something appeared that made me stop the playback and rewind. A human figure walking down the trail, heading in the direction the camera was facing. Nothing unusual about that. These were public lands. Other people hiked here, even on unmarked trails. But something about the figure's movement caught my attention. I played it again, watching more carefully. The person was wearing outdoor gear, carrying a pack, looking like any hiker. Except the figure was me. Same build, same gear, same everything. I was watching myself walk past the camera on a trail I'd never been on. Recorded 4 days after I'd set up the camera, but a week before I'd actually visited this location. I checked the camera's timestamp. It was correct, synced to GPS time. Impossible to be wrong by a week. I checked my own records, my journal where I meticulously logged every location visit. I hadn't been here 4 days ago. I'd been in a completely different section of the forest, miles away, working on other camera placements. But there I was on the footage, walking past with purpose like I knew exactly where I was going. I kept watching, fast-forwarding through hours of empty trail, and found myself again. Day 6. Walking the opposite direction this time, heading back the way I'd come in the earlier footage. Then day 8, appearing again, this time at night. My headlamp visible as I walked past. Day 10, day 12, day 14. I appeared 7 times in 2 weeks of footage, walking back and forth on this trail I'd never visited, wearing gear I recognized from my current setup. The most recent appearance was yesterday. The footage showed me approaching the camera directly, stopping in front of it, reaching up toward the lens. The video glitched, went black for 3 seconds, then resumed showing empty trail. Someone had tampered with the camera, and that someone looked exactly like me. I felt cold settling into my bones that had nothing to do with the forest temperature. I set up more cameras after that first one, I remembered suddenly. 6 more cameras on trails throughout this area, all placed during that initial setup day 2 weeks ago. I had memory cards from all of them in my pack, all waiting to be reviewed. I pulled them out with shaking hands and started going through footage, camera by camera, location by location. I appeared in all of them. Every single camera had captured me multiple times over the past 2 weeks, visiting locations I hadn't visited, walking trails I hadn't walked, doing things I hadn't done. In some footage, I was just passing through. In others, I was doing things I couldn't explain. Setting up what looked like campsites, collecting samples of plants, marking trees with spray paint, digging holes and burying things. All activities that made no sense, that served no purpose I could understand. Performed by someone wearing my face and body like they were mine to use. The footage showed me working with methodical efficiency, following some plan or purpose I wasn't aware of, living a parallel life in this forest while my conscious self was elsewhere doing normal work. The worst footage came from camera 5. It showed me approaching at night. But something was wrong with the movement. Too smooth, too fluid, like I was gliding rather than walking. The figure stopped in front of the camera and looked directly into the lens, and even though the night vision made the image grainy and strange, I could see the expression on that face. My face. But the eyes were wrong. Too reflective, catching the infrared light and glowing white, animal-like. The figure tilted its head at an angle that was almost right, but not quite, studying the camera with obvious intelligence, obvious awareness. Then it smiled, and the smile was too wide, showing too many teeth, stretching the face in ways faces shouldn't stretch. It raised one hand and waved, a deliberate greeting to whoever would eventually watch this footage. A greeting to me. Then it turned and walked away, movement returning to something approximating normal human locomotion, disappearing into the darkness. I sat there in the forest, surrounded by weeks of documentation, showing someone or something using my appearance to do things I couldn't explain, and tried to understand what this meant. Doppelganger, my mind supplied. That old folklore about seeing your double-meaning death was coming. But this wasn't folklore. This was digital footage, time-stamped and GPS verified, showing my double existing in multiple locations, active and purposeful and aware. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo library, looking for anything that might explain this. The recent photos were normal, pictures I remembered taking of wildlife and forest scenes. Then I scrolled back further and found photos I didn't remember. Hundreds of them, filling weeks of my camera roll, showing locations in this forest I didn't recognize. Pictures of the campsites I'd seen myself building in the trail camera footage. Close-ups of plants I'd been collecting, photos of items I'd apparently buried, taken before covering them with dirt. In several photos, my hand was visible holding the phone to take the picture. But the hand looked wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the fingers too long, the skin tone not quite matching my usual coloring. Something had been using my phone, accessing my camera app, documenting activities I had no memory of while masquerading as me, convincingly enough that the phone's facial recognition accepted it. I opened my location history and felt my stomach drop. According to the GPS data, I'd been making trips to this forest section regularly for the past month, visiting at times I knew I'd been elsewhere, spending hours in locations I'd never consciously been to. My phone thought I'd been here. The trail cameras confirmed I'd been here. But my memories said otherwise. Either I was experiencing massive gaps in memory, blackouts where I wandered the forest doing inexplicable things with no recollection afterward, or something else had been living part of my life for me, going places I should have gone, doing things I might have done, wearing me like a costume while I remained unaware. I made a decision. I needed to find the campsites I'd seen in the footage. Needed to see what I'd been doing, what had been buried, what purpose this doppelganger was pursuing. I pulled up the GPS coordinates from my location history and started hiking toward the nearest site. It took 40 minutes of bushwhacking through dense undergrowth. Following compass bearings to coordinates, my phone insisted I'd visited multiple times. The campsite was there, exactly as the trail camera footage had shown it. A small clearing with a tent set up, gear arranged neatly, a fire ring with recent ashes. Everything was my equipment, my tent, my sleeping bag, my cook set. A duplicate camp with duplicate gear existing in the forest while my actual equipment was in my truck. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, that I should leave immediately. The tent was zipped closed. I knelt in front of it and listened. No sound from inside, no indication of occupation. I reached for the zipper and froze. There were photos spread on the ground around the tent entrance. Dozens of them, printed on photo paper, arranged in a careful spiral pattern. I picked up the nearest one and felt reality tilt. It showed me sleeping in my bed at home, photographed from an angle that suggested someone standing in my bedroom doorway. The next photo showed me in my kitchen making breakfast. The next showed me at work, at my computer, taken through an office window. Photo after photo documenting my daily life in places where trail cameras didn't exist, where my doppelganger shouldn't have been able to reach. It had been following me everywhere. Not just in the forest, but in the city, in my home, documenting me with the same methodical thoroughness I used to document wildlife. I was being studied, observed, cataloged like I was the subject, and it was the researcher. I heard movement behind me and spun around. The doppelganger was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with those two reflective eyes. In full daylight, the wrongness was even more apparent. The proportions were almost right, but not quite. Like someone had built a me costume using measurements that were 95% accurate. It didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there observing me with the same clinical attention I'd seen in the nighttime trail camera footage. We stared at each other across the clearing, original and copy, real and replica. And I understood finally what was happening. It wasn't trying to replace me. It was trying to become me. learning my patterns, my behaviors, my life in exhaustive detail so it could transform from approximate copy to perfect duplicate. The camping, the photo documentation, the regular visits to locations I frequented, it was research. It was practice. It was preparation for the day when it knew me well enough to step into my life completely. And I'd simply cease to exist, replaced by something that wore my shape better than I did. I ran. I didn't try to confront it, didn't try to understand what it was or where it came from. I just ran back through the forest toward my truck, crashing through undergrowth, not caring about the trail cameras I was leaving behind, the equipment I was abandoning. I reached my vehicle and drove. Didn't stop until I was hours away, surrounded by people and city lights and all the trappings of civilization that should have felt safe. But I wasn't safe. I knew that now. Because when I checked my phone that night, there were new photos in my library. Photos taken during my panicked drive, showing me behind the wheel from angles that suggested someone in the back seat. It had followed me. Or it had always been with me. Or there was no distinction anymore between where I was and where it was, because we existed in the same spaces, followed the same paths, lived the same life with only slight delays between our actions. I checked my reflection constantly now, looking for signs of the wrongness I saw in the clearing. I review my location history obsessively, trying to catch discrepancies between where I remember being and where my phone says I was. And I've stopped going into the forest alone, stopped setting up trail cameras in remote locations. Because I know something is out there studying me, learning me, getting closer to perfect replication with every day. Someday soon it will be ready. Someday soon it will step fully into my life, and I'll be the one relegated to forest, camps, and trail camera footage. The discarded original watching my replacement live the life it stole. Until then, all I can do is watch and wait and document this while I'm still certain I'm the real one, while I still remember being human rather than something else wearing humanity like a carefully researched disguise. If you've experienced something similar, if you found evidence of yourself in places you've never been, if you've noticed your reflection moving wrong or your location history showing impossible journeys, share your story. Others need to know what's out there studying us, learning us, preparing to replace us one perfect copy at a time. You can find more stories like this on Verified Fears, where we document the encounters that challenge everything we think we know about reality and the things that exist just outside our perception, waiting for the right moment to step into our lives and make them theirs.